Move to the back. This seat is for our premium clients." Captain Richard Bennett's words cut through the hushed cabin of the G-800, his tone leaving no room for negotiation as he towered over Elise Townsend, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "There's been a mistake with your booking. What happens when arrogance meets its match, when prejudice crashes into power it never saw coming? Drop your city in the comments if you've ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly based on their appearance. And if you believe karma arrives exactly on schedule, hit that subscribe button right now. This story of justice isn't just satisfying, it's necessary. Today we're taking you inside the most exclusive airport terminal in America, where a pilot's snap judgment about who belongs in a premium seat led to consequences he never saw coming. Because the quiet black woman he tried to humiliate wasn't just any passenger, she owned the entire airline, the plane beneath his feet, and as he was about to discover his very career. In the pristine private lounge of Teterboro Airport, the morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric patterns across marble floors that had been polished to mirror-like perfection. The space hummed with the quiet confidence of wealth, not the loud, ostentatious kind, but the deep assured type that never needed to announce itself. Seated in a plush leather armchair angled away from the other guests, Elise Townsend appeared remarkably unremarkable. At 42, she carried herself with the composed elegance of someone who had nothing to prove. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, sleek knot at the nape of her neck. She wore no makeup beyond a hint of mascara. No jewelry except for a single watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had belonged to her father, its value apparent only to those who knew what they were looking at. Her navy blue cashmere travel set pants and a matching quarter zip whispered rather than shouted its 5-figure price tag. At her feet sat not a monogrammed luxury bag, but a worn leather messenger bag, its softened edges speaking to years of loyal service. In her hands was a dog-eared biography of Katharine Graham, the pages marked with discreet pencil notes in the margins. To the casual observer, she might have been a professor, perhaps a successful doctor waiting for a flight to a medical conference. Nothing about her screamed billionaire. Nothing suggested she was Elise Townsend, founder and CEO of Meridian Global Investments with a personal net worth of $4.2 billion and a reputation for transforming struggling companies into ethical powerhouses. And that was precisely the point. 2 weeks earlier, Meridian had finalized the acquisition of SkyElite Aviation, a struggling luxury charter company with impressive assets, but plummeting client satisfaction scores. The numbers told part of the story: declining bookings, increasing complaints, staff turnover at twice the industry average. But Elise suspected the real issues ran deeper than balance sheets could show. Operation Shadow Client, as she'd coded it in her personal calendar, was her proven method for diagnosing a company's cultural health. Today marked the first phase experience, the service as an unrecognized client. Her executive assistant had booked a simple one-way ticket from New York to Los Angeles for E. Townsend, not under her full name, not with any special requests, just a standard reservation on SkyElite's flagship G-800, the Phoenix. As she observed the lounge, her trained eye caught subtle indicators of the problems she suspected. The receptionist's strained smile when addressing certain guests, the way the attendants lingered near passengers with obvious displays of wealth while virtually ignoring others, the hushed tone of reprimand when a staff member spent too long assisting someone who wasn't dripping with status markers. Elise absently touched her father's watch, a ritual that connected her to her purpose. At 23, she'd experienced a pivotal moment that changed her trajectory forever. Holding a first-class ticket she'd saved months for to visit her dying grandmother, she'd been repeatedly accidentally overlooked during boarding, forced to stand aside while white passengers with later arrival times were accommodated. Maybe next time, book a real ticket. The gate agent had smirked. She'd missed saying goodbye to the woman who raised her. That day she'd made 2 promises: she would never be powerless again, and when she had power, she would never abuse it. People reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching, her father had always said. Today, she was invisible and ready to see what SkyElite's culture looked like when it didn't recognize the owner in its midst. Across the lounge, the atmosphere shifted as Captain Richard Bennett strode in. At 53, he cut an impressive figure in his crisp, dark navy uniform, his silver-streaked hair perfectly groomed, his posture military straight. The insignia on his uniform gleamed under the recessed lighting, and his commanding presence seemed to physically reshape the room, narrowing its focus toward him. Elise observed as he approached the service desk, not once making eye contact with any of the lounge attendants who scrambled to appear attentive. When a young Hispanic man offered him water, Bennett brushed past him as if he were invisible, causing the water to slosh onto the server's hand. The captain didn't notice or chose not to. Miss Palmer's reservation confirmed, he asked the receptionist, his tone clipped and professional, but tinged with an unmistakable deference that hadn't been extended to other guests. "Yes, Captain Bennett. She and Mr. Palmer are already here," the receptionist replied, gesturing toward a couple seated near the window. Elise shifted her attention to them. Victoria Palmer, approximately 55, exuded the kind of aggressive wealth that seemed to deliberately take up space. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob that didn't move when she tossed her head back in laughter that was too loud for the hushed environment. Diamond tennis bracelets, plural, caught the light with every gesticulation. Her cream-colored Chanel suit was immaculate, her red-soled stilettos clearly fresh out of the box. I specifically said 2A. Victoria's voice carried across the lounge as she spoke into her phone, each word precision-tooled to convey irritation. Not 2B, not 1A. "If Gregory is flying with us next month, I need to know now if you're capable of handling such a simple request." Her husband, Gregory Palmer, sat beside her, his face a mask of practiced patience. At 57, he had the pallid complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors reviewing spreadsheets and not enough time engaging with the world. His pewter gray suit was expensive but conservative, his manner deferential toward his wife. "They know who we are, dear," he murmured, patting her arm. "Captain Bennett always takes care of us." Victoria ended her call with a sharp jab at her screen. "He better. The Sinclairs got bumped to a newer aircraft last week when we were stuck with that older configuration. I don't care what Richard says about maintenance schedules. I know preferential treatment when I see it." Captain Bennett approached their seating area with a smile that transformed his face from stern to solicitous. "Mr. and Mrs. Palmer, always a pleasure. We have the Phoenix prepped and waiting. Your usual champagne is chilling." Victoria barely acknowledged him with a nod. "Richard the Whitcombs were given access to the owner's suite last week for their layover. I expect the same courtesy when we return from Los Angeles." "Of course, Mrs. Palmer. I'll speak to Terminal Services immediately." Bennett didn't miss a beat, his tone suggesting no request would be too extravagant. Elise made another note on her phone, her fingers tracing the edge of her father's watch. Palmer V. Extreme status sensitivity demands preferential treatment. Bennett R. Selective servility. Different treatment tiers based on perceived status, wealth display. Watch for impact on other passengers. This would be interesting indeed. The Phoenix gleamed on the tarmac like a predatory bird poised for flight, its sleek white fuselage stretching 101 feet from nose to tail. The morning sunlight bounced off its polished surface, and even from the terminal windows, Elise could make out the subtle SkyElite logo emblazoned near the cockpit, a stylized winged S that she had already flagged for rebranding in Meridian's acquisition plans. The G800 was SkyElite's crown jewel, a $75 million aircraft with a range of 8,000 nautical miles and interior design that rivaled boutique hotels. During the acquisition, Elise had personally reviewed the specifications requesting modifications for more sustainable materials and advanced air filtration systems. The plane she was boarding today represented the best of private aviation and potentially the worst of its culture. At the boarding announcement, Elise deliberately positioned herself to be the last passenger in the short queue. Captain Bennett led the way, followed immediately by Victoria Palmer, who had strategically maneuvered ahead of her husband. Gregory trailed behind, carrying both his leather portfolio and his wife's designer handbag, which she had thrust at him without looking back. The young flight attendant waiting at the aircraft steps offered a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Palmer." "Mr. Palmer." She set her name badge, identifying her as Morgan Rivera. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection. But Elise didn't miss the slight tension around her eyes, the look of someone bracing for impact. Victoria swept past without acknowledgement. Gregory at least managed a nod as he followed his wife. When Elise approached, Morgan's smile shifted subtly, becoming more genuine, less defensive. "Welcome aboard, Miss Townsend. My name is Morgan. I'll be taking care of you today." "Thank you, Morgan," Elise replied warmly. "It's a beautiful morning for flying." The momentary surprise that flickered across Morgan's face at being addressed by name spoke volumes. "It really is. Your seat is 1A, just to your right as you enter." Inside the aircraft cabin was a masterpiece of understated luxury. The main cabin featured 4 plush individual captain's chairs, 2 forward-facing and 2 aft-facing, arranged around a polished walnut table. Beyond that, a separate compartment held a small conference area and a divan that converted to a bed. The color palette was muted cream leather, brushed bronze accents, and warm wood tones that created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Seat 1A was positioned for maximum privacy, with its own partition offering both a large window and the most advanced personal workstation. It was objectively the best seat on the plane and the one that had been assigned to Elise Townsend when her assistant made the booking. As Elise settled in, she could hear Victoria's voice from behind her partition. "This is unacceptable," she hissed to her husband. "Arthur, look at this. We're in 2B. "That's fine, but that seat," she paused, and Elise knew she was being discussed. "That's the premium position. Why is she in it?" "Dear, it's just a seat," Gregory murmured placatingly. "We're on the same plane. It's the principal Victoria insisted. I specifically requested the best seat. I am a repeat client. She looks like she won some contest or charity auction. How did she even get through the Teterboro lounge?" Elise felt a familiar chill settle over her. Not anger, not hurt, but a crystalline clarity that had served her well throughout her career. This audit was already yielding the exact data she had suspected she'd find. As Morgan moved efficiently through the cabin offering pre-flight beverages, Elise observed the subtle hierarchies at play. Victoria's request for champagne received immediate attention, while another passenger who asked for water was told it would be just a moment, despite the bottle being clearly visible on Morgan's cart. Captain Bennett emerged from the cockpit, his presence filling the small cabin. He made a direct line for the Palmers, engaging them in conversation about their recent trip to Monaco, asking after their son at Princeton, sharing an inside joke that made Victoria offer her first genuine smile of the morning. He didn't stop at Elise's seat. In fact, his gaze swept past her as if the space were empty. Through her window, Elise noticed a maintenance technician complete a final check of the aircraft. The young Hispanic man moved with practiced efficiency, but when he attempted to communicate something to Bennett through the cockpit window, the captain dismissively waved him off without even looking at his clipboard. The technician's shoulders slumped slightly before he regained his professional demeanor and continued his work. That single interaction told Elise volumes about the company's culture. It wasn't just about passenger treatment, it was about who was deemed worthy of respect throughout the entire operation. She thought back to the acquisition meetings 3 months earlier. The outgoing CEO of SkyElite, Jonathan Pierce, had warned her about operational challenges. When pressed, he'd mentioned personality management issues with certain senior staff, but had quickly pivoted to discussing the company's impressive fleet. What he hadn't shared, what the numbers only hinted at, was a culture problem that appeared to start at the top and trickle down. A culture where worth was determined by appearance, where service quality depended on perceived status, where certain passengers were treated as more deserving than others based on superficial criteria. Elise subtly checked her watch, her father's watch, the one he'd worn when building his first company from nothing, the one he'd given her when she founded Meridian. Time reveals truth, he'd told her. You just have to be patient enough to wait for it. She had a feeling she wouldn't have to wait long today. The Phoenix's engines began their preliminary checks, a low hum vibrating through the fuselage. Through her window, Elise could see ground crew completing final preparations. Inside the cabin, the stage was set, the players were in position, and the real test was about to begin. What no one else aboard realized was that this wasn't just a flight from New York to Los Angeles. It was the first chapter in a transformation story, one that would ultimately change the course of an entire company, multiple careers, and perhaps even an industry standard. All it needed was a catalyst, a moment of truth that would reveal what happened when status and prejudice collided with unexpected power. That moment was coming, and Elise Townsend was ready. The Phoenix's cabin settled into pre-flight rhythm as Morgan completed her safety checks. Elise had placed her biography on the side table and was reviewing emails on her tablet when she felt rather than saw Victoria Palmer's gaze burning into the partition separating their seats. "Is there bottled water?" Victoria called out. Her voice pitched to carry unnecessarily in the small cabin. "Not tap, obviously, preferably Fiji, or at least Evian." Morgan appeared instantly. "Of course, Mrs. Palmer. We have Fiji still or sparkling. Still. And warm, not cold. I told Richard last time that cold water is bad for digestion during flight." Right away, Morgan replied, her professional smile never wavering. As Morgan moved to the galley, Victoria shifted in her seat to peer around the partition at Elise. Her gaze traveled deliberately from Elise's simple hairstyle to her cashmere travel set, lingering judgmentally on the worn leather messenger bag. First time on a private charter, Victoria asked her tone, suggesting she already knew the answer. Elise looked up with a pleasant smile. "No." The brevity of her response clearly caught Victoria off guard. She had expected either nervous confirmation or perhaps an eager explanation of how this rare opportunity had come about. When neither materialized, she pressed on. "It's just that most of our regular passengers know each other. Small community, you know. Victoria's emphasis on our and regular created a clear delineation, those who belonged and those who didn't." "Is that so?" Elise replied mildly, returning her attention to her tablet. Victoria's nostrils flared slightly at the dismissal. "My husband and I fly SkyElite at least twice monthly. Captain Bennett handles all our flights personally. He's the best in the fleet." When Elise offered only a polite nod, Victoria added with deliberate casualness, "These front seats are usually reserved for long-term clients. The solo configuration in 1A especially." Before Elise could respond, Morgan returned with Victoria's water. Victoria accepted it without acknowledgement, immediately testing its temperature with a touch to the outside of the glass before setting it down with a dissatisfied expression. "Morgan," she said, not bothering to lower her voice, "did Richard approve the seating chart for this flight? There seems to be some confusion." Morgan's professional composure flickered momentarily. "All seating is assigned based on booking information. Mrs. Palmer. Everyone is in their correct assigned seats." "Well, perhaps a review of priority status is needed," Victoria replied, her gaze sliding meaningfully toward Elise. "Some positions should be held for those who actually appreciate the difference." Gregory Palmer shifted uncomfortably, glancing apologetically toward Elise before focusing intently on his phone. His discomfort with his wife's behavior was evident, yet he made no move to intervene. From across the cabin, a third passenger, an older gentleman in an understated suit who hadn't engaged with anyone, glanced up from his newspaper with a mixture of discomfort and recognition. His eyes met Elise's briefly. and something like knowing solidarity flickered between them before he returned to his reading. Elise observed this dynamic with clinical detachment, making mental notes about the power hierarchy forming in the cabin. Victoria clearly considered herself the alpha passenger and expected the crew to reinforce this status. Morgan was caught in a precarious position, maintaining protocol while managing the expectations of a demanding regular client. Gregory's silence made him complicit, despite his apparent discomfort. Through the cabin window, Elise could see Captain Bennett conducting his external pre-flight inspection. His movements were precise, his attention to detail evident even from a distance. He was clearly competent at the technical aspects of his job, but competence without character, she had learned throughout her career, was a dangerous combination. The simmering tension in the cabin was palpable now. Victoria's displeasure had created an uncomfortable atmosphere that affected everyone, even those pretending not to notice. It was the kind of situation that revealed character both in how people wielded power and in how they responded when others did so inappropriately. Elise closed her tablet and tucked it into her messenger bag, her fingers brushing against her father's watch as she did so. Time reveals truth, she thought, and the truth was already revealing itself with remarkable clarity. Captain Bennett's return to the cabin brought an immediate shift in atmosphere. His commanding presence filled the space as he strode in from the cockpit, flight plan in hand, his uniform crisp and authority unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Phoenix. I'm Captain Richard Bennett, and I'll be commanding your flight to Los Angeles today. Our flying time will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes with favorable tailwinds forecasted over the Midwest. We're just waiting for final clearance from the tower, which should come through momentarily." His gaze moved methodically around the cabin, acknowledging each passenger with a professionally calibrated smile that reached full wattage when it landed on Victoria Palmer. "Mrs. Palmer. Mr. Palmer, always a pleasure to have you with us again." His tone warmed significantly compared to the standard announcement voice he had used seconds before. Then his gaze reached Elise. Something flickered across his expression, not recognition, but its opposite, a momentary assessment followed by dismissal. His eyes didn't quite meet hers, instead passing over her as if cataloging and then discarding what he saw. The slight downturn at the corner of his mouth was subtle but unmistakable. "Ma'am," he said with a curt nod, his voice cooling several degrees. The contrast between his warm greeting to the Palmers and this perfunctory acknowledgement hung in the air like a neon sign. Victoria seized the opening immediately. "Richard B. was just telling Morgan that there might be some confusion with the seating arrangements. You know, Gregory and I typically prefer the front configuration." Bennett glanced at the seat assignment display on his tablet. "I see. There does appear to be an unusual allocation today." He looked at Elise directly, now his expression professionally neutral but his eyes calculating. "Ma'am, would you perhaps be more comfortable in one of the aft seats? The Palmers are longtime clients who typically occupy the forward cabin." The implication was clear. Elise didn't belong in the premium position. Before she could respond, Victoria interjected. "It would be so appreciated. We have a certain routine on these flights, you understand." Victoria's voice dripped with the false sweetness of someone used to getting her way through a veneer of politeness. Elise met Bennett's gaze steadily. "My reservation is for 1A Captain. That's the seat I booked, and that's where I'm seated." Something hardened in Bennett's expression, a flash of annoyance at being challenged quickly masked by professional reserve. "Of course the manifest does indicate that assignment. However, as captain I have some discretion in cabin arrangements for optimal flight balance and client satisfaction. Is there a weight distribution concern with the aircraft?" Elise asked, her tone reasonable but firm. Bennett blinked, caught off guard by the specific technical question. "No, not specifically, but then I'm comfortable remaining in my assigned seat," Elise concluded calmly, opening her book to signal the discussion was over. Victoria made a small sound of indignation. Gregory looked increasingly uncomfortable while Morgan, who had been watching the exchange from near the galley, quickly busied herself with preparation tasks. Bennett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "As you wish, ma'am. Though I'm sure we could make arrangements that would satisfy everyone." The emphasis on everyone carried a clear suggestion that Elise was being difficult at others' expense. The older gentleman passenger suddenly lowered his newspaper. "Captain, if seat assignments are flexible, I'd be happy to move to accommodate Mrs. Palmer's preference." He offered his British accent refined, but his expression subtly ironic. Bennett looked startled, clearly not expecting support for Victoria from this quarter. "That's very considerate, Mr. Harrington, but—" "Not necessary," Elise interjected smoothly. "Everyone should remain in their assigned seats. I'm sure the booking system was designed to be followed, not overridden based on personal preferences." Harrington's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he returned to his paper. "Just trying to help," he murmured, though something in his tone suggested he was enjoying the disruption to the established hierarchy. As Bennett returned to the cockpit, the tension in the cabin ratcheted higher. Victoria began a hushed but clearly audible conversation with her husband. "Unbelievable. Richard needs to be more firm with these situations. That seat is practically reserved for us. Who does she think she is?" Gregory murmured something conciliatory that Elise couldn't quite catch, though his discomfort was evident in his hunched shoulders and averted gaze. Morgan approached Elise with a glass of water she hadn't requested. "Can I get you anything else before takeoff, Ms. Townsend?" she asked quietly. Elise noticed the slight tremor in Morgan's hand, a physical manifestation of the tension she was navigating. "No, thank you, Morgan. I appreciate you following the proper seating assignments. I know it can't be easy mediating these situations." Something flickered in Morgan's eyes, surprise at being seen, at having the uncomfortable dynamic acknowledged. She offered a small, genuine smile before moving away to secure the cabin for takeoff. Through her window, Elise could see the ground crew disconnecting the external power unit. The engines would be starting momentarily. She made a few more discreet notes on her phone before switching it to airplane mode. Captain shows clear passenger preference hierarchy, uses professional authority as leverage for social engineering, invents discretion policy on cabin arrangements when none exists in operations manual. Flight attendant caught between protocol and pressure from captain. So far, Operation Shadow Client was confirming her suspicions about SkyElite's culture problems, but she had a feeling the real test was yet to come. The Phoenix taxied smoothly toward the runway, its powerful engines humming with contained energy. Inside the cabin, a different kind of energy was building, one of simmering conflict and barely concealed disdain. Victoria Palmer had not accepted defeat gracefully. As the aircraft completed its pre-flight checks, she maintained a steady stream of commentary, just loud enough to be heard beyond her seating area. "I don't understand why we even have a frequent flyer program if it doesn't guarantee appropriate accommodation," she said to Gregory, though her voice was clearly pitched to carry. "What's the point of loyalty if just anyone can walk in and take premium positions?" Gregory nodded absently, his attention fixed on his tablet where he was reviewing documents for what appeared to be a real estate deal. His disengagement seemed habitual, a man who had learned that the path of least resistance was silent agreement. Harrington, the British passenger, caught Elise's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible eye roll before returning to his newspaper. Clearly, the Palmers' behavior was familiar to other regular clients. Elise remained focused on her book, though she absorbed every word. Victoria's behavior was textbook status anxiety, a desperate need to assert hierarchy, even in spaces designed for equal premium service. More telling was how the crew responded to it. The cabin intercom chimed softly. "Flight attendant, this is the captain." Bennett's voice held a note of controlled irritation. "Could you come to the flight deck for a moment?" Morgan moved swiftly toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the door. Though the conversation was inaudible, the tension in Morgan's posture when she emerged a few minutes later spoke volumes. Her professional smile had tightened, and there was a new wariness in her eyes as she glanced briefly toward Elise. The Phoenix received clearance and began its takeoff roll, the powerful acceleration pressing everyone gently back into their seats. As they lifted into the clear morning sky, Elise caught Morgan making a subtle adjustment to her uniform jacket, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for something unpleasant. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dimmed, Morgan approached Elise's seat with an expression of carefully constructed neutrality. "Ms. Townsend." She began her voice professional, but with an undercurrent of tension. "Captain Bennett has asked me to inform you that there's been a policy update regarding our premium solo configuration." Victoria's conversation with Gregory immediately ceased her attention, laser-focused on the interaction. Elise closed her book, giving Morgan her full attention. "What sort of policy update, Morgan?" Morgan swallowed visibly. "The captain has indicated that Seat 1A is now designated for our Platinum Elite members only as part of our new loyalty program structure. He's requested that you relocate to one of the aft seats for the remainder of the flight." The fabrication was transparent. SkyElite had no such policy, and certainly no captain had the authority to implement one mid-flight. Morgan's discomfort with delivering the message was evident in her rigid posture and the way she avoided direct eye contact. "That's interesting," Elise replied calmly. "I wasn't aware of any loyalty tier restrictions when my seat was confirmed yesterday. Could you show me where this policy is documented?" Morgan hesitated, caught between the captain's instructions and the obvious impossibility of producing documentation for a non-existent policy. "I don't have the exact documentation on hand, but the captain has authorized the change based on operational discretion." From behind her partition, Victoria made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. Finally, she murmured to Gregory, "Richard is handling it properly now." Harrington abruptly folded his newspaper and leaned forward. "Excuse me, but I've been flying SkyElite for 15 years and I've never heard of this Platinum Elite designation or any seating restrictions based on it." His tone was polite but firm. "And I'm quite familiar with the company's operations manual." Victoria shot him an irritated glance. "Perhaps you're not in the tier that would be informed of such policies." Perhaps Harrington replied with a thin smile. "Though as a board member of Harrington Aviation Group, I do try to stay informed about industry standards and policies." The revelation of Harrington's industry connection created a momentary ripple of tension. Bennett hadn't recognized him either, another example of judgments based on appearances rather than facts. Elise maintained her composed demeanor. "Morgan, I understand you're in a difficult position, but I'll need to see the written policy before changing seats. My reservation was confirmed for 1A, and without proper documentation, I must insist on remaining where I'm properly booked." Morgan's discomfort visibly increased. "I'll speak with the captain again," she said quietly, retreating toward the cockpit. Victoria chose this moment to rise from her seat, ostensibly to visit the lavatory, but clearly using the opportunity to make her presence felt. She paused by Elise's partition. "You know," she said with false conviviality, "sometimes it's just easier to go with the flow. No need to make things awkward for everyone." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and evaluating. Elise met her gaze steadily. "I find that going with the flow often means accepting improper treatment. That's not something I'm willing to do." Victoria's smile froze. "Well, some of us have earned our place here through years of loyalty. It's not just about having a ticket." "Is that right?" Elise replied mildly. "And what exactly have you done to earn special treatment beyond paying the same fare as everyone else?" The direct question caught Victoria off guard. She was accustomed to deference, not challenge. Before she could formulate a response, the cockpit door opened and Captain Bennett emerged, his face set in lines of professional authority tinged with annoyance. The confrontation had officially begun. Captain Bennett approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having his authority unquestioned. His expression was a study in controlled displeasure, brows slightly furrowed, mouth set in a firm line, eyes coolly assessing as he stopped beside Elise's seat. "Ms. Townsend." He began, his tone clipped and formal. "There seems to be some confusion about our seating policies. As captain of this aircraft, I have final discretion over cabin arrangements for optimal weight distribution and client comfort." Elise noted his strategic positioning, standing while she remained seated, using his height and uniform to amplify his authority. It was a classic intimidation technique, one she had observed countless times in corporate boardrooms. "What specific weight distribution concerns do you have, Captain Bennett?" she asked, her voice level and precise. Bennett's momentary hesitation revealed the fabrication. "It's not solely a weight issue. It's a matter of established client protocols. The Palmers are Platinum Elite members who regularly occupy the forward cabin positions." "I see," Elise replied. "And where exactly is this Platinum Elite designation documented? I reviewed SkyElite's service tiers thoroughly before booking and saw no mention of seating restrictions based on loyalty status." Victoria, who had remained nearby to witness what she clearly expected to be Elise's capitulation, interjected. "It's not always about what's written down. Some things are simply understood among regular clients." Bennett seized on this. "Exactly. Mrs. Palmer understands our service model. These premium positions are typically reserved for our established clients who have certain expectations about their flying experience." Elise turned her attention fully to Bennett, ignoring Victoria's presence. "Captain, let me be direct. Are you creating a policy on the spot to justify moving me from my assigned seat because Mrs. Palmer wants it, or because you've made an assumption about who belongs in which seat based on appearances?" The bluntness of the question hung in the air. Morgan, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, froze. Gregory Palmer suddenly found his tablet intensely fascinating. Victoria's expression hardened into indignation. Harrington lowered his newspaper, completely no longer pretending not to listen, his expression a mixture of interest and something like satisfaction. Bennett's jaw tightened. "I'm not creating anything, ma'am. I'm simply enforcing our standard practices for client satisfaction." "Interesting," Elise replied. "Because I've reviewed SkyElite's operations manual, service protocols, and client charter. Nowhere does it state that captains may reassign confirmed seats based on their personal assessment of who constitutes a regular client or who belongs in which seat." Something flickered in Bennett's eyes. Surprised that this seemingly ordinary passenger was familiar with company operations documents, quickly masked by renewed determination. "Ms. Townsend," he said, his voice taking on an edge of condescension, "perhaps you misunderstand the nature of private aviation. This isn't a commercial flight with rigid seating charts. We provide a customized experience for our valued clients, and part of my job is ensuring that experience meets certain standards." "And what standards am I failing to meet, Captain Bennett?" Elise asked quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her father's watch. The question was a trap, and Bennett sensed it too late. Any direct answer would reveal the prejudicial basis of his actions. He opted for vagueness. "This isn't about you personally. It's about respecting established client relationships." Victoria nodded emphatically. "Exactly. This is about respect." "I couldn't agree more," Elise said, her gaze steady on Bennett. "Respect includes honoring confirmed reservations, following documented policies, and treating all clients with equal consideration, regardless of how they're dressed or who you assume they are." The implicit accusation was clear. Bennett's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm not going to debate this further. As captain, I'm requesting that you relocate to one of the aft seats. If you're unwilling to comply with crew instructions, I'll need to consider whether you're creating a disruptive situation that impacts flight safety." The escalation to a safety issue was a significant overstep, one that transformed a service dispute into something potentially more serious. Morgan's eyes widened in alarm at this development. "Are you suggesting that my sitting in my assigned seat constitutes a safety concern?" Captain Elise asked, her voice remaining calm but taking on a new sharpness. I'm suggesting that failure to comply with crew instructions can be classified as disruptive behavior, Bennett replied. And I would hate for this minor seating issue to escalate unnecessarily. The threat was thinly veiled. Gregory Palmer finally looked up from his tablet, genuine concern crossing his features. Richard, surely this isn't necessary. Victoria and I are perfectly comfortable where we are. Victoria shot her husband a look of betrayal. Gregory, don't. Bennett barely acknowledged Gregory's attempt at de-escalation. I need a decision, Ms. Townsend. Will you cooperate with the crew's seating arrangement, or do we need to take further steps? The cabin fell silent. Everyone was watching now, the tension palpable. Morgan stood frozen, clearly torn between her duty to support the captain and her evident discomfort with what was transpiring. Harrington had set aside his newspaper entirely and was watching with the keen interest of someone who recognized a pivotal moment in progress. Elise met Bennett's gaze directly, her calm unbroken, but her resolve clear in every line of her posture. Captain Bennett, I will not be moving from my assigned seat. Your request has no basis in company policy, FAA regulations, or basic courtesy. If you choose to escalate this situation, I suggest you consider very carefully what you're really defending and whether it's worth the consequences that will follow. Something in her tone, not loud, not aggressive, but absolutely certain, caused Bennett to hesitate. For the first time, doubt flickered across his features as he considered whether this unremarkable-looking woman might be more than she appeared, but pride and authority won out. Very well, he said stiffly. We'll address this formally when we land. For now, I'll note your refusal to comply with crew instructions in my flight report. As he turned to head back to the cockpit, Elise spoke once more. Captain Bennett. He paused, looking back with barely contained impatience. I'd like your full name and employee identification number for my own records, please. The request, professional specific and implying future accountability, visibly unsettled him. After a moment's hesitation, he supplied the information with obvious reluctance before retreating to the cockpit, the door closing with a decisive click behind him. Victoria stared at Elise with undisguised hostility, before returning to her seat, whispering furiously to Gregory about entitlement and knowing one's place irony apparently lost on her. Morgan approached cautiously. Can I get you anything? Ms. Townsend? She asked quietly, a new note of respect in her voice. Just some water, please, Elise replied. And Morgan. None of this is your fault. You've handled an impossible situation with remarkable professionalism. The young flight attendant's relief was visible. Thank you, she whispered before moving to fulfill the request. Harrington caught Elise's eye and gave her a slight nod of approval before returning to his newspaper, though Elise noticed he wasn't actually reading it anymore but watching the cabin dynamics with keen attention. Elise returned to her book, outwardly composed. Inside, however, her mind was cataloging every detail of the interaction, every nuance of Bennett's behavior, every revealing comment from Victoria Palmer. The test had revealed exactly what she needed to know about SkyElite's culture, and now it was time to prepare for the next phase of Operation Shadow Client, the revelation. The Phoenix cruised at 41,000 feet, its powerful engines creating a gentle background hum that normally lulled passengers into relaxed comfort. Today, however, the atmosphere inside the luxurious cabin crackled with unresolved tension. An hour had passed since the direct confrontation. Captain Bennett remained in the cockpit, communicating with the cabin only through brief formal announcements about flight conditions. Victoria Palmer maintained a steady stream of passive-aggressive commentary, loudly discussing with Gregory the declining standards of private aviation and how some people simply didn't understand the established protocols of luxury travel. Morgan moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, her professional demeanor intact despite the obvious strain. She had been placed in an impossible position, caught between a captain's inappropriate demands and her own professional ethics. The way she navigated this tension revealed much about her character. At one point, Victoria summoned Morgan with a sharp snap of her fingers, a gesture so dismissive it made Harrington visibly wince behind his newspaper. "My champagne is warm," Victoria complained. "And I specifically asked for the Krug, not whatever this is." "I apologize, Mrs. Palmer. We only stock Dom Perignon on this route as noted in your preference profile. I'll bring you a fresh glass immediately." Morgan's professional tone never wavered, though a muscle tensed in her jaw. "Well, someone should update that profile," Victoria sniffed. "Richard always arranges Krug for us." Morgan nodded and retreated to the galley, where Elise caught a brief moment of closed eyes and deep breathing before the young flight attendant composed herself and prepared a fresh glass. Elise observed it all while appearing absorbed in her book. She noticed how Morgan ensured equal service despite the pressured environment, the small acts of quiet rebellion in the flight attendant's even-handed attention to all passengers. There was potential there, the kind Elise looked for when rebuilding company cultures. The intercom chimed softly. "Flight attendant to the cockpit." Bennett's voice announced the brief command, clipped and formal. Morgan disappeared into the flight deck. Through the partially open door, Elise caught fragments of a tense, hushed conversation. "Not acceptable. Passenger relations. Need to handle this. But, sir, the manifest clearly shows." "Don't care what it shows. Reputation with the Palmers." When Morgan emerged a few minutes later, her expression was carefully neutral, but the tightness around her eyes told a different story. She moved to the galley, busying herself with preparation tasks, her movements just a fraction too precise a person trying to maintain composure under pressure. Elise's phone vibrated with an incoming message. The aircraft's satellite connection allowed limited communication during flight, and the text was from Isabella Martinez, SkyElite's head of operations, responding to an earlier message about an unrelated matter. Cabin service review meeting confirmed for Thursday. Attached preliminary findings from client satisfaction survey. The timing was serendipitous. Victoria chose this moment to make another unnecessary trip to the lavatory, pausing deliberately near Elise's seat. "You know," she said, her voice pitched to carry, "in all my years, flying private, I've never seen someone make such a scene over a simple courtesy request. It's really not that difficult to understand that some arrangements are based on relationships rather than whoever happened to book first." Elise looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze with calm directness. "Mrs. Palmer, I understand you're accustomed to special treatment. But consider this if Captain Bennett is willing to disregard confirmed reservations based on personal preference or appearance. What other policies might he be bending? What safety protocols might be compromised for valued clients? Excellence isn't selective, it's consistent." Victoria's eyes widened slightly, the implication clearly unsettling her despite her determination to maintain the moral high ground. That's completely different. Richard is an exemplary pilot. I'm sure his technical skills are excellent," Elise agreed. "But leadership is about more than technical competence. It's about integrity, especially when no one's watching or when everyone is." From his seat, Harrington suddenly chuckled, no longer pretending not to listen. "Well said. In 30 years in aviation, I've found that pilots who bend non-safety rules often develop a concerning flexibility around the safety ones as well." Victoria looked between them, momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected alliance. Before she could respond, the satellite phone in the cabin rang. Morgan answered promptly, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to surprise as she listened to the caller. "Yes, of course. Right away." She glanced toward Elise. "Ms. Townsend, there's a call for you from SkyElite headquarters. Ms. Martinez would like to speak with you." Victoria froze, confusion creasing her brow. Why would operations be calling a passenger? Morgan handed the phone to Elise, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Isabella, good afternoon," she said, her tone shifting subtly from passenger to executive. "Yes, I've been observing some interesting dynamics." "No, nothing that can't be addressed with appropriate measures." "Yes, I think it's time. Please proceed with Protocol 17. The color drained from Morgan's face as comprehension dawned. Protocol 17 was SkyElite's Emergency Leadership Intervention Code, a procedure known only to senior management and operations directors. Elise handed the phone back to Morgan. Ms. Martinez would like to speak with Captain Bennett immediately. Please inform him it's regarding Protocol 17 and requires his immediate attention. Morgan nodded, moving swiftly to the cockpit. Victoria remained rooted in place, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning alarm. Harrington had set aside all pretense of disinterest, watching the unfolding situation with undisguised fascination. "Who are you?" Victoria demanded, her previous condescension replaced by uncertainty. "Someone who believes that how we treat people when we think it doesn't matter reveals everything about who we truly are," Elise replied evenly, her fingers tracing the edge of her father's watch. The cockpit door opened with more force than necessary. Bennett emerged, his face flushed with a combination of anger and apprehension. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, striding toward Elise. "Who are you to initiate Protocol 17? Elise rose slowly from her seat, meeting Bennett at eye level. The dynamic had shifted. No longer was he standing over her using height and position as tools of intimidation. "Captain Bennett," she said, her voice carrying a new note of authority that transformed the cabin's atmosphere. "I think it's time we discussed who belongs where on this aircraft." The breaking point had arrived. "I don't know what game you're playing." Bennett set his voice tight with controlled anger. "But Protocol 17 requires authorization from executive leadership. Using those code words fraudulently is a serious violation." Elise maintained steady eye contact, her calm unbroken. "No fraud has occurred, Captain Bennett. The authorization is entirely legitimate." Victoria moved closer, her earlier confidence replaced by growing unease. "Richard, what's happening? Who is she?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "That's what I intend to find out." He turned to Morgan. "Contact security at LAX. We'll have this sorted upon landing." "I wouldn't do that just yet," Elise advised Morgan quietly. "Not until Captain Bennett has checked his secure company email." Something in her tone, absolute certainty without a trace of concern, gave Bennett pause. He pulled out his company tablet, navigating to his email with quick, irritated movements. His expression shifted as he saw a new message marked "Urgent" from the board of directors. As he read, the color drained from his face. His eyes darted between the screen and Elise, disbelief battling with dawning realization. "This is impossible," he muttered, the tablet shaking slightly in his hands. "What is it?" Victoria demanded, anxiety making her voice sharp. Bennett seemed unable to formulate a response, staring at Elise as if seeing her for the first time. Harrington had risen from his seat, positioning himself with a clear view of the unfolding drama, his expression one of keen interest. "Perhaps introductions are in order," Elise said, addressing the cabin at large but keeping her eyes fixed on Bennett. "My name is Elise Townsend, founder and CEO of Meridian Global Investments. As of 2 weeks ago, the new owner of SkyElite Aviation." The silence that followed was absolute. Morgan's hand flew to her mouth. Gregory Palmer straightened in his seat, his expression shifting from discomfort to alarm. Victoria stood frozen, her perfectly maintained facade cracking visibly. "Oh my God," Harrington breathed, then broke into a broad smile. "I thought I recognized you from the Aviation Leadership Summit last year. Brilliant acquisition strategy, by the way." Bennett found his voice first. "Ms. Townsend, there must be some misunderstanding. Had you known who I was," Elise interrupted gently, "you would have treated me differently. That's precisely the problem, Captain Bennett. The level of respect and service you provide shouldn't depend on who you believe someone to be." She turned slightly to include Victoria in her gaze. "Or how they dress, or whether they display obvious wealth. or whether they demand special treatment. Victoria's face flushed deep crimson. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again for once, at a loss for words. "What happens now?" Bennett asked. His previous authority evaporated. "Now we have a choice to make," Elise replied. "We can either continue this flight with a clear understanding of expectations going forward, or we can make arrangements for alternative flight crew at our next fueling stop." The implicit ultimatum hung in the air. Bennett's professional future balanced on a knife's edge, and he knew it. "I believe I can complete this flight professionally," he said stiffly. "I'm sure you can," Elise agreed. "The question is whether you understand why your previous behavior was unacceptable." Bennett's jaw worked as he struggled between pride and self-preservation. "I was attempting to accommodate long-standing clients." "You were enforcing a hierarchy of your own creation," Elise corrected him firmly, "one based on appearances and assumptions rather than policy or principle. When challenged, you escalated to threats about disruptive behavior rather than examining your own actions." She glanced at Victoria. "And you enabled and encouraged this behavior, Mrs. Palmer, treating this aircraft as your personal domain rather than a shared premium service for which all passengers pay equally." Victoria's shock was giving way to indignation. "I have been a loyal client for years. That should count for something. Loyalty should earn appreciation, not preferential treatment that comes at others' expense," Elise replied, "especially not when that preferential treatment is rooted in assumptions about who belongs in which seat." Bennett suddenly straightened, a flash of defiance crossing his features. "With all due respect, Ms. Townsend, I've been with this company for 15 years. I've maintained an impeccable safety record and built relationships with our most valuable clients. One uncomfortable interaction doesn't negate that history." Elise nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about your technical record, Captain. But this isn't about one interaction. This is about a pattern." She turned to Morgan. "Ms. Rivera, in your 10 months with SkyElite, have you witnessed or been asked to participate in similar situations, where certain passengers were treated differently based on appearance or assumed status?" Morgan hesitated, glancing nervously at Bennett before answering. "Yes, Ms. Townsend. Many times." "And what happened when passengers or crew members raised concerns about these practices?" Morgan swallowed hard. "Complaints were logged in a secondary system where they wouldn't impact official metrics. Crew members who questioned these practices were reassigned to less desirable routes or had their schedules reduced." Bennett's face darkened. "That's an exaggeration and completely out of context." "Is it?" Elise interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Because your personnel file shows 7 formal complaints buried in exactly such a system. 3 from staff members who were subsequently reassigned or who resigned. 4 from passengers who coincidentally never booked with SkyElite again." Bennett fell silent, the confirmation clearly catching him off guard. "Captain, I'll need your decision," Elise continued. "Can you complete this flight with equal respect and service for all passengers? Or should I ask Isabella to arrange for replacement crew?" The question was really about the future, not just this flight but his career at SkyElite under new ownership. Bennett was intelligent enough to recognize the crossroads before him. "I can complete the flight appropriately," he said, after a moment, the words clearly difficult for him. "But I would like the opportunity to discuss my record and approach in a more appropriate setting than the middle of a flight. Fair enough?" Elise nodded. "We'll have that conversation when we land. For now, please return to the cockpit and focus on your primary responsibility, the safe operation of this aircraft. We'll discuss broader implications later." Bennett hesitated, then nodded curtly before retreating to the cockpit. Victoria remained standing, struggling to process the complete inversion of the cabin's power dynamic. This is a learning opportunity," Elise supplied calmly. "For all of us." Victoria's composure finally cracked. You deliberately misled everyone. You could have simply identified yourself from the beginning and missed the opportunity to experience how this company truly operates when no one thinks the owner is watching. That would have been a poor business decision, Elise replied. Now, I believe you were heading to the lavatory. The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. Victoria turned wordlessly and continued to the rear of the cabin, her usual confident stride replaced by stiff, uncertain movements. Morgan stood nearby, visibly processing everything she had witnessed. Her professional mask had slipped, revealing a mixture of awe and apprehension. Morgan Elise said softly, "You've been placed in an impossible position today. You've handled it with remarkable grace and integrity. Please know that I've noticed." Relief washed over the young flight attendant's features. "Thank you, Ms. Townsend. I've tried to follow protocol while navigating pressure from both the captain and demanding clients," Elise finished for her. "I know, and we'll talk more about that after we land. For now, please continue as you were." Harrington approached as Morgan moved away. "Elise Townsend," he said with genuine admiration. "I wondered if our paths would cross eventually." "James Harrington." He extended his hand. "The Harrington Aviation Group," Elise acknowledged, shaking his hand. "Your industry analyses have been quite valuable in our acquisition strategy. I suspected something was happening when Meridian started acquiring aviation-adjacent companies last year," he replied with a knowing smile. "Brilliant vertical integration strategy, and even more brilliant assessment method." He gestured subtly around the cabin. "The only way to truly see a company's culture is to experience it as its most vulnerable stakeholder," Elise said. "Reports and metrics only show what the system wants you to see." "I may borrow that approach," Harrington admitted, "though I doubt I'll ever pull it off with quite your flair for dramatic revelation." As he returned to his seat, Gregory Palmer approached Elise, his expression contrite. "Ms. Townsend, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior and my own failure to intervene. There's no excuse." Elise studied him thoughtfully. "Recognition is the first step toward change, Mr. Palmer. What matters now is what follows." Gregory nodded, accepting the implicit challenge in her words before returning to his seat where Victoria had reappeared, her expression shell-shocked. Elise settled back into her seat, the biography once again open in her hands. To a casual observer, she might have appeared to be simply reading unbothered by the dramatic events that had just unfolded. In reality, she was giving everyone space to process the revelation and preparing herself for the conversations that would follow once they landed. The Phoenix continued its journey westward, but everything inside it had changed. The revelation had altered not just the immediate dynamic, but the future trajectory of the company itself. Like the mythical bird the aircraft was named for, SkyElite was about to rise from the ashes of its former culture, reborn through the catalyzing heat of this pivotal moment. The revelation of Elise's identity created a palpable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. What had been tense hostility transformed into something more complex, a mixture of shock, realization, and in some cases the dawning horror of consequences to come. Elise remained in her seat, allowing the implications to settle across the cabin. From her peripheral vision, she could see Victoria and Gregory engaged in intense whispered conversation, Victoria's gestures becoming increasingly agitated, while Gregory maintained a placating posture that seemed habitual. Harrington caught her eye and raised his water glass in a subtle toast, his expression one of amused appreciation for the drama he had just witnessed. Morgan moved through the cabin with a new energy, still professional, but without the earlier strain of navigating competing pressures. The young flight attendant caught Elise's eye briefly, offering a small smile that contained equal parts relief and gratitude. The intercom chimed. Ms. Townsend Bennett's voice had adopted a carefully neutral tone. "We've received clearance for our most optimal route. Our updated arrival time in Los Angeles will be 2:35 p.m. local time." The formality was a transparent attempt to demonstrate professionalism after the fact. Elise acknowledged it with a simple "Thank you, Captain," before returning to her book. After a few minutes of continued whispered debate, Victoria Palmer rose and approached Elise's seat. Her usual confidence was dimmed but not extinguished. A lifetime of social privilege didn't evaporate in an instant, even when confronted with higher authority. "Ms. Townsend." She began, her tone carefully modulated to project composed dignity. "I feel I should explain my perspective on what occurred earlier." Elise closed her book, giving Victoria her full attention. "I'm listening." Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of discomfort on her cheeks. "As long-standing clients of SkyElite, Gregory and I have developed certain expectations about our travel experience. Perhaps I've grown accustomed to particular accommodations." "That's understandable," Elise replied evenly. "Habits form easily, especially when they're repeatedly reinforced." Encouraged by what she perceived as understanding, Victoria continued. "Exactly. And when routines are disrupted, it can be jarring. My reaction wasn't personal. It was simply about maintaining the standards we've come to expect. The standard of having whatever seat you prefer regardless of reservations." Elise asked, her tone gentle but pointed. "Or the standard of having crew members enforce your preferences at others' expense?" Victoria's facade cracked slightly. "That's not. I never directly asked Richard to." "You didn't have to," Elise observed. A system was already in place where certain passengers received preferential treatment based on perceived status. You benefited from that system and reinforced it through your expectations and behaviors. The directness left Victoria momentarily speechless. She regrouped, attempting a different approach. "We've invested significantly in SkyElite over the years. Our loyalty should count for something." "It does," Elise agreed. "It counts toward respectful, excellent service delivered consistently to all clients who pay for it. What it doesn't count toward is special treatment that diminishes others' experience or creates a two-tier service model based on subjective criteria." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "With all due respect, Ms. Townsend, you've observed one interaction on one flight. That hardly provides a complete picture of how SkyElite operates." "You're absolutely right," Elise said, surprising Victoria with her agreement. "That's why Operation Shadow Client has included multiple flights across different routes with various crew members over the past 2 weeks. Today's flight was simply the culmination of a comprehensive audit." Victoria paled visibly. "You've been testing the entire company?" "Experiencing it," Elise corrected. "As clients do. The results have been illuminating." From his seat, Harrington chuckled softly. "I'd pay good money to read that audit report." Victoria shot him an irritated glance before turning back to Elise. "And what happens now to SkyElite, to our relationship with the company?" "That depends entirely on your willingness to adapt to a new reality," Elise replied honestly. "SkyElite will be implementing a comprehensive cultural reset focused on consistent excellence rather than selective preference. Some clients will find that aligns perfectly with their values. Others may prefer service providers that maintain the status hierarchies they're accustomed to. The choice is yours." Victoria seemed to be reassessing her position in real time, calculating her best approach in this unexpectedly altered reality. "I see. Well, I appreciate your candor." She hesitated, then added with clear effort, "And I apologize if my behavior earlier was inappropriate." "Thank you," Elise acknowledged. "Recognition is the first step toward change." As Victoria returned to her seat, Morgan approached discreetly. "Miss Townsend, would you care for something to eat? We have a selection of light meals prepared. That would be lovely." "Thank you," Elise replied. As Morgan moved to the galley, the cockpit door opened, and co-pilot Javier Rodriguez emerged. He approached Elise with professional deference. "Ms. Townsend, Captain Bennett has asked me to provide our updated flight plan and fuel status," he said, handing her a tablet displaying the relevant information. It was a transparent excuse to make contact Bennett sending an emissary rather than facing her directly. But it also revealed something important about the co-pilot. Rodriguez had been silent throughout the earlier confrontation, neither supporting nor challenging Bennett's behavior. His body language now suggested a man cautiously navigating a changed landscape. "Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez," Elise said, reviewing the information briefly. "Everything looks in order. May I ask how long you've been with SkyElite? 3 years next month, ma'am," he replied. "Previously with Pacific West for 8 years. And how would you characterize the culture at SkyElite compared to your previous employer?" Rodriguez hesitated, glancing briefly toward the cockpit before lowering his voice. "SkyElite has excellent equipment and technical standards," he offered diplomatically. But Elise prompted gently. Rodriguez glanced briefly toward the cockpit before lowering his voice. "But there are unwritten rules about client tiers that create operational challenges. I've seen excellent pilots passed over for premium routes because they wouldn't accommodate certain client preferences." He hesitated, then added, "I once filed a safety concern about a maintenance schedule being altered for a high-profile client. It disappeared from the system the next day, and my premium route assignments dropped by half." The admission was clearly difficult for him, a calculated risk in this shifting power dynamic. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Rodriguez. I appreciate integrity, especially when it isn't easy." Relief flickered across his features. "Will there be anything else, Ms. Townsend?" "Just one thing. When we land, I'll need 30 minutes with you, Captain Bennett and Morgan, for a preliminary debrief before my next meeting. Could you relay that to the captain?" "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Rodriguez returned to the cockpit with a noticeably lighter step. Morgan returned with an elegant place setting and a carefully plated meal. As she arranged it on Elise's table, she spoke quietly. "Ms. Townsend, I don't know if this is appropriate to mention now, but there's something you should know about Captain Bennett." Elise looked up with interest. "Go ahead, Morgan. 6 months ago, I observed him skipping a required rest period to accommodate a last-minute request from a high-profile client. When I raised the safety concern, he told me that certain rules are flexible for certain clients, and that understanding that was essential to my career progression." Morgan's voice shook slightly. "I filed a report with operations, but nothing happened except my schedule was suddenly filled with the least desirable routes for 3 months. Harrington leaned forward with a concerned expression. "That's a serious safety violation, not just a service issue." "Yes, it is." Elise agreed, her expression grave. "And it confirms that the cultural problems extend beyond service preferences to potentially impact operational safety." She turned back to Morgan. "Thank you for sharing this. I promise you it will be addressed and there will be no retaliation." As the Phoenix continued its journey westward, Elise observed the subtle but profound shifts occurring within the cabin. The revelation of her identity had removed the protective cover that had allowed problematic behaviors to flourish. Exposed to light, those behaviors could now be addressed directly. This was always the most delicate phase of a culture transformation, the moment when old patterns were disrupted, but new ones hadn't yet fully formed. It was a time of uncertainty, vulnerability, and opportunity. The real work was just beginning. The Phoenix began its descent into Los Angeles, the sprawling city stretching beneath them in a vast grid of highways and buildings shimmering in the afternoon sun. Inside the cabin, an uneasy calm had settled the quiet after a storm when the immediate danger has passed, but the damage remains to be fully assessed. Victoria and Gregory Palmer had retreated into silence, each occupied with their devices, though Elise suspected neither was truly focused on their screens. Their body language had shifted, Victoria's usual commanding presence diminished Gregory's perpetual deference, replaced by thoughtful consideration. They were recalibrating, adjusting to a new reality where the social hierarchy they had navigated so comfortably had been fundamentally altered. Morgan moved through the cabin with professional efficiency, preparing for landing. The young flight attendant's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her movements more confident, her smile more genuine, her posture free from the tension that had marked her earlier service. When she caught Elise's eye, there was a flash of something like hope in her expression. Harrington had abandoned any pretense of reading his newspaper and was openly observing the cabin dynamics with the keen interest of someone witnessing a pivotal moment in an industry he knew intimately. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bennett. We're beginning our final approach into Los Angeles International Airport. Current weather conditions are clear with light winds, temperature 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Local time is 2:28 p.m. Flight attendant, prepare the cabin for landing." Bennett's voice maintained professional detachment, but Elise detected the underlying tension. He was a man performing competence while internally calculating the professional consequences that awaited him on the ground. As the Phoenix descended through 10,000 feet, Elise's phone vibrated with an incoming message from Isabella Martinez. Arrangements complete per Protocol 17. Security and HR representative standing by. Replacement flight crew on standby for return leg if needed. Legal team reviewing Bennett's personnel records and safety compliance history. The message confirmed that Isabella was already implementing the preliminary steps of what would become a comprehensive cultural reset. Protocol 17 wasn't just about addressing individual incidents. It was the initiation of a top-to-bottom review of company practices, policies, and personnel. Elise sent a brief acknowledgement before switching her phone to airplane mode. The mechanisms were in motion. What had begun as an undercover assessment was transforming into active intervention, the first concrete step in rebuilding SkyElite's culture from the ground up. The aircraft touched down with the gentle precision that spoke to Bennett's technical skill, a smooth landing that barely disturbed the water in the glasses secured in their holders. As they taxied toward the private terminal, the gravity of what awaited became evident through the cabin windows. A small welcoming committee stood on the tarmac, not the usual ground crew, but a group of professionally dressed individuals with SkyElite identification badges clearly visible. At their center stood a tall woman in her mid-40s with a confident stance and alert eyes that scanned the approaching aircraft, Isabella Martinez, head of operations. Bennett's voice came over the intercom once more, the professional script unable to mask his unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Los Angeles International Airport. Local time is 2:36 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach our designated parking position and the engines have been shut down." As the Phoenix came to a stop and the engines wound down, Morgan moved to open the cabin door. The brief silence that followed was heavy with anticipation, a collective held breath before the consequences began. Isabella Martinez was the first to board, her expression composed but determined. "Ms. Townsend, welcome to Los Angeles," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you, Isabella," Elise replied warmly. "I appreciate your quick response to Protocol 17. Isabella nodded, then turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for any disruption to your arrival. Mr. and Mrs. Palmer, a dedicated ground service team, is waiting to assist you with your onward arrangements. Captain Bennett and First Officer Rodriguez, please remain on board for an immediate operational debrief. Ms. Rivera, your presence is also requested." Victoria Palmer rose from her seat, her composure partially restored, though her usual commanding presence remained diminished. "Ms. Townsend," she said with careful formality, "I hope our misunderstanding today won't permanently affect our relationship with SkyElite. That depends entirely on mutual expectations moving forward," Elise replied evenly. "SkyElite values all its clients. Mrs. Palmer, What's changing is the definition of value and how it's expressed in our service model." Victoria absorbed this with a tight nod before following Gregory toward the exit. As they passed, Gregory paused briefly. "For what it's worth, Ms. Townsend, I believe the changes you're implementing are long overdue." It was a small act of independence, perhaps his first in their relationship, and Victoria's startled expression confirmed its significance. Once the Palmers had departed, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Bennett emerged from the cockpit, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his anxiety. Rodriguez followed, maintaining a respectful distance from his captain present but not allied. Ms. Townsend Bennett began, his tone formal. "I want to express my sincere regret for the misunderstanding earlier. Had I known—" "That's precisely the point," Captain Bennett Elise interrupted gently. "Your behavior shouldn't depend on knowing who I am. The level of respect and adherence to policy should be consistent for every passenger, regardless of perceived status or importance." Bennett's jaw tightened further, but he nodded. "I understand. I assure you, my intentions were to maintain what you believed was the established order," Elise finished for him. "An order where certain passengers receive preferential treatment based on subjective criteria, while others are deemed less worthy of occupying premium spaces." The directness left Bennett momentarily speechless. Isabella stepped forward. "We've arranged for a private conference room for this discussion. I suggest we continue there rather than in the cabin." "Of course," Elise agreed. "Morgan, would you join us as well? Your perspective is valuable." Morgan looked surprised, but nodded, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. Mr. Harrington Elise addressed the British passenger who was preparing to disembark. "Thank you for your observations today. They've been illuminating." "The pleasure was entirely mine," he replied with a small bow. "I look forward to seeing how SkyElite evolves under your leadership. The industry could use a reset of this nature." As they disembarked, Elise paused at the aircraft steps, taking in the gleaming Phoenix in the afternoon sunlight. The aircraft itself was blameless, a magnificent machine designed to deliver exceptional experiences. The problem lay in how human biases had corrupted that purpose, creating a hierarchy of worth that undermined the very premium service SkyElite promised to provide. That was about to change. In the private conference room with its panoramic views of the airfield, the real work began. Bennett sat stiffly, his hands clasped before him on the polished table. Rodriguez maintained a neutral expression, though his posture suggested readiness rather than defensiveness. Morgan sat with surprising composure, her earlier nervous energy transformed into focused attention. "Let me be clear about what happened today." Elise began, her tone measured but firm. "It wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. It was a systematic failure of service culture, one that appears to be endemic rather than isolated based on my observations across multiple flights during the past 2 weeks. Bennett's expression tightened, but he remained silent. "Captain Bennett, your technical skills are not in question. Your judgment regarding passenger treatment, however, reveals a concerning pattern of bias and preferential treatment that directly contradicts SkyElite's service commitment." Ms. Townsend Bennett finally responded, his tone carefully controlled. "Private aviation has always operated with certain flexible accommodations for our most loyal clients. That flexibility should never extend to creating a discriminatory environment where some passengers are made to feel unwelcome based on appearances or assumptions," Elise countered. "Today you invented policies that don't exist, escalated a seating preference to a safety issue, and attempted to intimidate a passenger into compliance, all to satisfy another client's desire for status affirmation." The blunt assessment hung in the air. Isabella nodded slightly, her expression confirming that she had witnessed similar behaviors before. Bennett's professional facade began to crack, his composure giving way to defensive anger. "With all due respect, Ms. Townsend, you deliberately created this situation. You could have simply identified yourself from the beginning instead of playing this elaborate game to trap me. The outburst revealed more than any controlled response could have. Rodriguez looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with his captain's reaction. I didn't create a situation, Captain Bennett. I simply experienced your company as an ordinary client would, Elise replied calmly. The fact that you see that as a trap rather than a legitimate assessment speaks volumes about your awareness of your own behavior. And now you'll use this one incident to dismiss 15 years of exemplary service, Bennett demanded, his voice rising. This is absurd, Isabella stepped in, her voice firm but professional. Captain Bennett, this isn't about one incident. Miss Townsend referenced a pattern, and our preliminary review has already identified multiple documented concerns that were improperly handled or suppressed, including safety violations, Elise added quietly. Bennett's eyes widened. That's a serious accusation. It is, Elise agreed, and one we'll be investigating thoroughly. Morgan has already shared one specific instance involving rest period violations. I suspect there are others. Bennett turned to Morgan with a look of betrayal. You did exactly what she should have done, Elise interjected. Reported a legitimate safety concern through proper channels. The fact that she faced retaliation rather than support is another example of the cultural problems we're addressing. Bennett fell silent, the gravity of his situation clearly sinking in. Here's what happens next, Elise said, her tone shifting from inquiry to decision. SkyElite will undergo an immediate and comprehensive cultural reset. Isabella will oversee implementation of new service protocols that emphasize consistent excellence for all clients regardless of appearance, background, or relationship history. Isabella nodded, producing a tablet with preliminary documentation already prepared. The framework has been developed based on Ms. Townsend's observations over the past 2 weeks. Implementation begins immediately. As for individual outcomes, Elise continued, those will be determined based on demonstrated willingness to embrace these changes and critically past behavior regarding safety protocols and reporting integrity. She looked directly at Bennett. Captain Bennett, in light of the safety concerns that have emerged, you are being placed on administrative leave pending a thorough review of your record. This isn't punitive, but precautionary safety is non-negotiable in aviation. Bennett's face drained of color. This is outrageous. This is accountability, Elise corrected firmly. Something that has been notably absent in how service issues and safety concerns have been handled under your command. She turned to Rodriguez. First Officer Rodriguez, thank you for your honesty earlier. Your insight about suppressed safety reports is valuable, though I'm concerned about your silence in the face of problematic behaviors you clearly recognized. I hope you'll take this opportunity to realign your actions with the values of integrity and consistency that I know you hold. Rodriguez nodded soberly. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Finally, Elise addressed Morgan. Ms. Rivera, your professionalism under extraordinary pressure today was remarkable. The way you navigated competing demands while attempting to uphold proper protocols speaks to your character and potential. I'd like you to consider taking on a new role within our organizational reset, perhaps as an advisor on service culture from the frontline perspective. Morgan's expression reflected surprise and cautious hope. I thank you, Ms. Townsend. I would be honored to contribute. As the meeting continued, specific next steps were outlined, responsibilities assigned, and timelines established. Throughout, Elise maintained a focus on transformational change rather than punitive measures, building a new culture rather than simply tearing down the old one. When they finally adjourned, Bennett departed with a security escort to begin his administrative leave process, his earlier defiance replaced by grim resignation. Rodriguez headed to the crew lounge to prepare for his return flight with a replacement captain. Isabella remained behind to coordinate the immediate implementation of Protocol 17 across the company. Morgan hesitated at the door, then turned back to Elise. Ms. Townsend, may I ask you something? Of course. Elise replied. Why did you choose seat 1A? Was it deliberately to test how we'd respond? Elise smiled slightly. Yes, it was the seat most likely to trigger a reaction if preferential treatment was indeed the norm, the most visible position with the highest perceived status value. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. And if no one had challenged your right to sit there, then I would have known SkyElite's culture was better than I feared, Elise replied. But the reaction from Bennett from Victoria Palmer from the system itself revealed exactly what needed to change. Morgan absorbed this with a thoughtful nod. Thank you not just for the opportunity, but for seeing what was really happening when no one thought anyone important was watching. As Morgan departed, Elise stood at the window watching ground crew prepare the Phoenix for its return journey. The aircraft would fly again tomorrow, but with a different crew under different expectations as part of a different company culture. The transformation had begun, and like all meaningful change, it had started not with grand pronouncements, but with a single moment of accountability, a quiet insistence that everyone deserved respect, regardless of appearance, title, or perceived status. The Phoenix was living up to its name. From the ashes of a biased culture, something new was beginning to emerge. The California sun cast long shadows across the private terminal as Elise concluded her meeting with SkyElite's West Coast operations team. After the revelations aboard the Phoenix, she had immediately expanded her planned visit to include a comprehensive assessment of ground operations, maintenance protocols, and staff experiences. What she discovered confirmed her initial suspicions. The problematic culture wasn't limited to in-flight service. It permeated every aspect of the organization, from preferential maintenance scheduling for certain clients' aircraft to uneven enforcement of safety protocols based on passenger status. The company had developed an unwritten but widely understood hierarchy that compromised both service quality and operational integrity. It's like there are two different companies, explained Carlos Mendez, a senior maintenance technician who had requested a private meeting. The one in the manual and the one we actually operate. If certain clients need a quick turnaround, suddenly the recommended inspection intervals become flexible guidelines. If others need specific amenities, required weight distributions get recalculated on the spot. His hands trembled slightly as he shared documentation he'd been quietly collecting for years. Evidence of maintenance procedures altered to accommodate VIP schedules, safety checks expedited beyond recommended parameters, crew rest periods adjusted to meet client demands. Why risk sharing this now? Elise asked gently. Because for the first time I believe something might actually change, he replied. What you did on that flight. People are talking about it throughout the company, even in the maintenance hangars. As Elise reviewed the preliminary findings with Isabella in a quiet corner of the executive lounge, her phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Robert Alastair Meridian's HR director, who had been tasked with evaluating Captain Bennett's personnel file. File review complete. 7 previous complaints about preferential treatment buried in secondary systems, all from passengers who didn't fit the profile. 3 from internal staff who reported concerns, all dismissed without investigation. Most concerning, found evidence of 4 rest period violations in last 18 months, all for high-profile clients. FAA reporting requirements potentially compromised. The message confirmed what Elise had suspected. Bennett's behavior wasn't an isolated incident, but a manifestation of a broader cultural problem that had been systematically concealed from formal review. Worse, it had extended beyond service issues to potential safety violations. It's worse than we thought, she told Isabella, showing her the message. The rot runs deeper than individual behavior. It's been institutionalized through selective enforcement and buried complaints, and it's potentially crossed the line into safety violations. Isabella nodded grimly. I suspected as much. Some of us have tried to address these issues before, but without executive support. She trailed off, the implication clear. That changes now, Elise said decisively. I need you to implement the Phase 1 protocols immediately. Full transparency, equal enforcement, comprehensive review of all passenger and staff complaints from the past 18 months. No exceptions, no matter who's involved. And Bennett Isabella asked, Contact legal immediately. If these rest period violations are confirmed, this goes beyond administrative action to potential regulatory issues. He had a choice to make, and he made it consistently prioritizing client convenience over safety protocols. Isabella was already typing the necessary instructions to HR and legal when Morgan Rivera arrived for her scheduled follow-up meeting. The young woman had changed from her flight uniform into business attire, and even this simple change seemed to amplify the natural confidence that had been suppressed in the toxic environment. Ms. Townsend, Ms. Martinez, she greeted them, her expression reflecting nervous excitement. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Elise assured her. In fact, your timing is perfect. We were just discussing next steps for implementing the cultural reset. Morgan took a seat, smoothing her skirt with slightly trembling hands. I've been thinking about your offer, about advising on service culture. I'd like to accept if it's still open. It is Elise confirmed. In fact, based on what we've observed today, I'd like to expand the scope. What would you think about taking on a more formal role, perhaps as Director of Client Experience? You'd work directly with Isabella to develop and implement our new service standards with a focus on consistency, respect, and genuine hospitality. Morgan's eyes widened. Director, but I've only been with SkyElite for 10 months. I don't have management experience. You have something more valuable, Elise interrupted gently. You have a clear vision of what service should be and the courage to maintain your principles even when it's difficult. You've also experienced firsthand how toxic leadership affects frontline staff. That perspective is invaluable in rebuilding our culture. I don't know what to say, Morgan stammered clearly, overwhelmed by the opportunity. Say you'll consider it. Elise smiled. The role would involve significant responsibility, including helping to rebuild our training programs, establishing new accountability systems, and creating service standards that apply equally to all clients. I don't need to consider it, Morgan replied, her voice finding new strength. I accept. This is exactly why I joined aviation in the first place, to create exceptional experiences for people. I just never imagined having the chance to shape how that happens at an organizational level. Isabella smiled warmly. Your perspective will be invaluable and symbolic of our new direction, elevating those who embody our values rather than those who simply reinforce old hierarchies. Their planning session was interrupted by a discreet knock at the door. Isabella's assistant entered, her expression tense. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at the main terminal. The Palmers are expressing displeasure about the replacement crew arrangements, rather publicly. Elise exchanged glances with Isabella. I think it's time we address this directly, she said, rising from her seat. Morgan, would you join us? This may be a good real-time application of the principles we've been discussing. As they made their way to the main terminal, Isabella briefed them on the situation. Victoria Palmer had apparently learned that Bennett would not be commanding their return flight, triggering a heated confrontation with ground staff that had escalated to demands to speak with whoever's in charge. The scene that greeted them was predictably tense. Victoria Palmer stood in the center of the private terminal's reception area, her voice raised, her gestures animated. Gregory stood slightly behind her, his expression caught between embarrassment and resignation. This is absolutely unacceptable, Victoria was saying to the increasingly uncomfortable receptionist. We have always flown with Richard's crew. Always. I don't care what protocol you're citing. I want to speak to someone with actual authority. Elise stepped forward calmly. Mrs. Palmer, I believe I qualify. Victoria turned sharply, her expression shifting from indignation to wary calculation as she recognized Elise. Ms. Townsend, perhaps you can explain why our standard arrangements have been unilaterally altered without consultation. Of course, Elise replied evenly. As I mentioned earlier, SkyElite is undergoing a comprehensive service reset to ensure consistent excellence for all clients. Part of that reset includes reviewing and revising practices that created inequitable experiences or compromised operational integrity. And this relates to our return flight. How exactly Victoria pressed, though her earlier volume had moderated considerably. Captain Bennett has been placed on administrative leave pending a review of several concerning issues, including potential safety violations, Elise explained. As a result, a new flight crew has been assigned to all his scheduled routes, including your return to New York. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. You suspended Richard. Over a simple seating misunderstanding. No, Mrs. Palmer. Captain Bennett is on leave pending investigation of multiple issues, including serious concerns about rest period violations and selective enforcement of safety protocols. What occurred today simply brought these long-standing issues to light. Victoria looked genuinely startled. Safety violations. But Richard always said that certain rules were flexible for certain clients. Elise supplied. That's precisely the problem. In aviation, safety protocols aren't suggestions, and they shouldn't be applied selectively based on who's flying. For the first time, Victoria seemed truly unsettled rather than simply annoyed. The implication that her comfort had potentially come at the expense of proper safety procedures clearly disturbed her. Gregory stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. What Ms. Townsend is saying, Victoria, is that we've been complicit in a system that prioritized our convenience over proper protocols. We may not have created it, but we certainly participated in it. Victoria stared at her husband in surprise. His unusual assertion of an independent perspective clearly caught her off guard. The new crew is highly experienced and fully briefed on your preferences, Elise continued smoothly. You'll receive the same excellent service as every other SkyElite client, attentive, personalized, and respectful. The only difference is that it will be delivered within the framework of proper operational protocols. She gestured toward Morgan, who had maintained a professionally composed expression throughout the exchange. Ms. Rivera, in her new role as Director of Client Experience, will personally oversee your return journey. She'll ensure that all your legitimate needs are met according to our new service standards. Morgan stepped forward with quiet confidence that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. Mrs. Palmer, Mr. Palmer, I'd be happy to review your preferences and ensure your comfort throughout the journey while introducing you to your new flight crew. Victoria looked between them, her habitual indignation battling with the sobering realization about safety protocols. After a moment's consideration, she nodded stiffly. Very well. We'll adapt to these new arrangements. As Morgan guided the Palmers toward a private lounge to discuss their return journey, Isabella turned to Elise with quiet admiration. That was masterfully handled, she observed. Firm, but not confrontational. Clear, but not punitive. And did you see the difference in Morgan already? From intimidated flight attendant to confident director in a matter of hours. People rise to the level of trust and responsibility you give them, Elise replied. Morgan always had this potential. The old system simply suppressed it instead of nurturing it. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from Robert Allister. His voice was grave as he shared the preliminary findings of the legal review. It's worse than we initially thought. We've identified at least 7 instances where Bennett appears to have violated mandatory rest periods to accommodate client schedules. More concerning, we found evidence that he may have influenced maintenance records to expedite aircraft availability for certain clients. That crosses the line from service issues to potential regulatory violations. Elise noted, her expression serious. We have an obligation to report this to the FAA. Legal is already preparing the necessary documentation, Robert confirmed. They recommend immediate termination rather than administrative leave, given the seriousness of the findings. Elise considered this advice thoughtfully. proceed with the termination, but ensure it's handled professionally. This isn't about public humiliation, but about accountability and organizational integrity. Make it clear that the decision is based on the safety violations, not the service issues we observed today." As Elise ended the call, she noticed Carlos Mendez, the maintenance technician, watching her from across the terminal. He gave her a small, respectful nod, acknowledgement from someone who had witnessed problems for years but never had the power to address them. Within hours, the initial phase of SkyElite's transformation was in full motion. Bennett had been officially terminated with full documentation of the safety violations provided to both him and relevant regulatory authorities. Key leadership positions were being reassessed, with several promotions already announced for staff who had maintained integrity despite pressure to compromise. A comprehensive review of all operational protocols was underway, with particular focus on areas where client preferences had been allowed to override standard procedures. The Phoenix was truly rising from the ashes, its rebirth catalyzed by a single moment of accountability aboard its namesake aircraft. What had begun as an undercover assessment had transformed into a full-scale cultural revolution, one that promised to redefine not just how SkyElite operated, but how private aviation itself could balance premium service with consistent standards. The transformation had begun, and like all meaningful change, it had started not with grand pronouncements, but with a quiet insistence on integrity, regardless of who was watching. 3 days after the pivotal flight on the Phoenix, Elise sat in SkyElite's New York headquarters, surrounded by the company's senior leadership team. The large conference room overlooked Central Park, its panoramic windows offering a view of the lush greenery below, but no one was admiring the scenery. All attention was focused on the comprehensive transformation plan displayed on the main screen. Operation Shadow Client has revealed organization-wide issues that go beyond individual behavior. Elise explained, her tone measured but resolute. What we've uncovered is a 2-tier service model that compromises our core promise of premium experience for all clients. Around the table, reactions varied. Some executives nodded in agreement, clearly relieved that long-standing concerns were finally being addressed. Others shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in the problematic culture. A few maintained carefully neutral expressions, still calculating how this change would affect their positions and influence. Isabella Martinez, seated at Elise's right, advanced to the next slide. "Our audit revealed concerning patterns across multiple touchpoints," she explained. "Preferential maintenance scheduling for aircraft used by certain clients. Selective enforcement of safety protocols, buried complaints from both passengers and staff. Different standards of service based on subjective assessments of client importance." Robert Alistair Meridian's HR director continued the briefing. Most concerning was the organized suppression of feedback that contradicted the preferred narrative. Staff who raised concerns were routinely reassigned to less desirable routes or schedules. Complaints from passengers who didn't fit the elite profile were logged in secondary systems where they wouldn't impact official metrics. Elise studied the faces around the table, noting who appeared surprised by these revelations and who did not. The distinction would be telling as they moved forward with the transformation. Beginning today, she announced, SkyElite is implementing a comprehensive cultural reset focused on 3 core principles: consistent excellence, equal respect, and transparent accountability. She gestured to Morgan Rivera, who now sat at the leadership table in her new role as Director of Client Experience. The promotion had raised eyebrows among some executives, but Elise's faith in Morgan's potential had proven well-founded. In just 3 days, she had demonstrated remarkable insight and initiative in reimagining SkyElite's service approach. "Our current service model creates artificial hierarchies that undermine the premium experience we promise." Morgan explained, her initial nervousness giving way to confident expertise as she spoke. "Moving forward, we'll define premium not by preferential treatment for some, but by consistent excellence for all." She advanced to the next slide, which outlined specific changes to service protocols, training procedures, and performance metrics. Every client who pays for SkyElite's services deserves the same level of respect and attention regardless of appearance, background, or relationship history. Our crew will be evaluated on their consistency in delivering this standard, not on their ability to anticipate and accommodate status-based preferences. One of the longer-tenured executives, Michael Harrington, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. While I appreciate the idealism here, we need to be realistic about our client base. Many of our highest-spending clients expect preferential treatment. They've grown accustomed to certain accommodations. That's precisely the problem, Elise replied evenly. We've trained a segment of our clientele to expect special treatment based not on what they've paid for, but on who they appear to be. That creates an inherently discriminatory environment where service quality depends on subjective assessments rather than objective standards. But the reality is that some clients do spend significantly more than others, Harrington persisted. Surely that merits some differentiation in service approach. Differentiation based on what they've purchased. Absolutely, Elise agreed. If a client books a larger aircraft, requests specific amenities, or pays for additional services, they should receive exactly what they've paid for. What they shouldn't receive is preferential treatment over another client who has paid for the same level of service but doesn't fit someone's mental image of elite. A younger executive who had remained silent until now suddenly spoke up. I've been waiting years for someone to say exactly that. All eyes turned to her. I'm sorry, but it's true. I've watched clients who look like me get randomly selected for secondary verification, questioned about their bookings, or seated in less desirable positions despite identical reservations. I've tried to address it before, but... Her voice trailed off, the unspoken implication clear. Without leadership support, such concerns were career-limiting. That ends today, Elise stated firmly. And I want to be absolutely clear, this transformation isn't just about service equity. It's about operational integrity and safety as well. Our investigation has uncovered multiple instances where safety protocols were compromised to accommodate client preferences or schedules. The revelation created a ripple of concerned murmurs around the table. The Phoenix Protocol isn't optional, and it isn't a public relations exercise. Elise continued. It's a fundamental reimagining of how we define premium service and how we operate as a company. Those who embrace it will thrive in the new SkyElite. Those who don't should consider whether this is still the right environment for their talents. The directness of the statement silenced the room. Elise had made it clear this wasn't a suggestion but a new direction. Adaptation was required, not optional. The discussion continued, addressing practical implementation challenges, training requirements, and metrics for measuring success. Throughout the conversation, Elise observed the gradual shift in the room from skepticism to consideration, from resistance to cautious engagement. Not everyone was fully convinced, but the direction was clear. SkyElite was changing with or without individual buy-in. As the formal meeting concluded and executives began to disperse, Elise noticed Morgan deep in conversation with Carlos Mendez, the maintenance technician who had shared critical documentation. Their animated discussion spoke to the breaking down of hierarchical barriers that had previously prevented such cross-departmental collaboration. They're already forming new alliances, Isabella observed, following Elise's gaze. People who maintained their integrity despite the old system are finding each other now that it's safe to do so. That's the most powerful aspect of cultural transformation, Elise replied. We don't have to create something entirely new, we just have to uncover and elevate what was always there, hidden beneath layers of dysfunction. Speaking of which, Isabella said, gesturing toward a small group of mid-level managers huddled near the door. Their expressions wary, we still have pockets of resistance. Several of Bennett's closest allies are clearly concerned about their positions, as they should be if they enabled or perpetuated the problems we've identified, Elise replied. But transformation isn't about purging everyone associated with the old regime. It's about providing clear expectations and pathways forward, then letting people choose whether to adapt. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Harrington, the British passenger from the Phoenix flight, now revealed as the CEO of Harrington Aviation Group, one of the industry's most respected consulting firms. Ms. Townsend. He greeted her warmly. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by. I've been following the ripples from your Phoenix flight with great interest." "Mr. Harrington," Elise acknowledged with a smile, "I'm not surprised you've been keeping tabs on developments. When one of the industry's most prestigious private carriers undergoes such a dramatic transformation, everyone pays attention," he replied. "What you've initiated isn't just affecting SkyElite. It's causing introspection throughout private aviation." "In what way?" Elise asked, genuinely curious. "3 of our other client companies have already requested cultural audits similar to your Operation Shadow client," he explained. "CEOs suddenly want to know if their companies have the same issues you uncovered. No one wants to be the next cautionary tale." "And your assessment?" Elise pressed. Harrington's expression turned wry. "Having witnessed the Phoenix incident firsthand, I'd say most have at least some of the same challenges. Private aviation has operated on implicit biases for decades. You've simply brought them into the open where they can no longer be ignored." As Harrington departed, promising future collaboration, Morgan approached with a tablet displaying preliminary data from staff surveys initiated under the Phoenix Protocol. "The results are illuminating," she reported. 87% of frontline staff report having been pressured to provide preferential treatment based on subjective client assessments rather than service tier. 64% have witnessed or experienced retaliation for raising concerns about unfair practices. And more concerning, Isabella added 42% report having observed safety protocols being adjusted to accommodate client preferences or schedules. "Those numbers validate our intervention," Elise noted. "This isn't an isolated problem or a perception issue. It's a comprehensive cultural challenge that requires equally comprehensive addressing." As they continued reviewing the data, a notification appeared on Elise's tablet, an update from the legal team handling Bennett's termination. The former captain had initially threatened litigation claiming wrongful dismissal, but had quickly backed down when presented with the documented safety violations. He was now seeking a negotiated separation agreement that would allow him to maintain his pilot certifications. "How do you want to proceed?" Isabella asked after reading the update. Elise considered thoughtfully. "Our goal isn't punishment but accountability and reform. Offer a fair separation package contingent on full cooperation with our internal review. No non-disclosure requirements. We have nothing to hide in our handling of this, but a mutual non-disparagement clause to allow everyone to move forward professionally." Later that evening, as Elise reviewed the day's developments from her Manhattan office, she received a notification that caught her attention. Victoria and Gregory Palmer had booked another flight on SkyElite, their first since the incident on the Phoenix. The reservation included a specific note: standard seating acceptable. No special arrangements required. It was a small indicator, but a meaningful one. At least some of those accustomed to the old system were willing to adapt to the new one. Others would not. Elise had already received reports of several long-term clients transferring their business to competitors after learning of Bennett's departure and the new service approach. That was an acceptable cost of meaningful change. The transformation of SkyElite was still in its early stages, with much work remaining to embed the new values throughout the organization. But the foundation had been laid, a foundation built on the recognition that true premium service wasn't about selective preference, but consistent excellence, not about reinforcing status hierarchies, but ensuring equal respect for all who chose to fly with SkyElite. As she closed her tablet, Elise's gaze fell on her father's watch. "Time reveals truth," he had always said. And the truth that had been revealed aboard the Phoenix was now guiding a transformation that extended far beyond a single flight or even a single company. It was challenging an entire industry to reconsider what premium truly meant in the context of human dignity and operational integrity. The Phoenix was rising renewed not just in name, but in purpose. 2 weeks after her unexpected promotion, Morgan Rivera stood by the window in her new office at SkyElite's Manhattan headquarters, watching aircraft movements on the distant runway. The space was still sparsely decorated. She hadn't had time to personalize it yet, but it already felt like a symbol of the remarkable transition in her life. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Elise Townsend stood in the doorway, characteristically understated, in a simple charcoal dress, her expression warm. "Do you have a moment?" Elise asked. "I wanted to check in on how you're settling into the role." "Of course," Morgan replied, gesturing to the small seating area near the window. "I was just taking a rare quiet moment to process everything that's happened." As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Morgan couldn't help but reflect on the contrast between this conversation and their first meeting aboard the Phoenix. Then she had been a junior flight attendant caught in an impossible situation trying to navigate conflicting pressures with her dignity and principles intact. Now she was a director reporting directly to the company's owner, helping to reshape the culture that had once constrained her. "It's been quite a journey already," she admitted with a small smile. "I keep expecting someone to tell me there's been a mistake, that they've found someone more qualified for this position." "No mistake," Elise assured her. "In fact, your performance so far has confirmed what I saw in you that day on the Phoenix. An innate understanding of what true service means, and the courage to stand by those principles even when it's difficult." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "That day was clarifying. When Captain Bennett instructed me to tell you about a non-existent seating policy, I knew I was being asked to participate in something wrong, but I also felt trapped by the system. If I had refused, I would have faced consequences that I couldn't afford, being removed from premium routes, possibly even losing my position entirely. That's exactly the dynamic we're working to change," Elise agreed. "A culture where doing the right thing carries a personal cost while enabling discrimination is rewarded." Morgan hesitated, then decided to share something she hadn't yet revealed. "What you may not know is that it wasn't my first experience with that kind of situation. I've been asked to deliver similar messages to other passengers who didn't look the part according to certain crew members or clients." "Tell me more," Elise encouraged gently. Morgan took a deep breath. There was an older black couple who had booked the master suite on a transatlantic flight. The husband was a renowned surgeon flying to accept a humanitarian award, but he was dressed comfortably for the long journey. Captain Westfield, one of Bennett's close colleagues, instructed me to tell them there had been a system error with their booking, and they'd need to use the standard seating instead. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap as she continued. When I asked for clarification, he said, "They won't know the difference anyway." I complied because I felt I had no choice, but I've never forgotten the quiet dignity with which they accepted the change, never suspecting the real reason behind it. "And did you report the incident?" Elise asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "I tried," Morgan confirmed. "I filed it through the proper channels. 3 days later, I was removed from international routes for 6 weeks due to scheduling adjustments. The message was clear." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with emotion. "Do you know what hurts the most about these situations? It's not just that we treated people unfairly. It's that we stole their truth from them. That surgeon never knew what really happened. He probably left thinking there was a genuine mistake, never realizing he'd been discriminated against because of how he looked." Elise nodded, her expression reflecting understanding rather than surprise. "Your experience matches the pattern we've uncovered throughout the organization, a system designed to protect itself by silencing those who question it, while keeping those who experience discrimination in the dark about what's really happening. That's why this opportunity means so much to me," Morgan said earnestly, gesturing to the office around her. "It's not just a promotion or a career advancement. It's the chance to transform a culture that I know from the inside out, to ensure that no crew member ever feels forced to choose between their principles and their livelihood, and no passenger is ever secretly downgraded based on their appearance. And that's exactly why you're the right person for this role, Elise affirmed. You understand both the frontline experience and the stakes of our transformation. You've lived the consequences of the old culture and have a clear vision for the new one. Morgan's expression became more determined. I've already begun implementing some changes. We've created an anonymous reporting system that bypasses the traditional chain of command, ensuring concerns reach leadership without interference. We're revising training protocols to emphasize consistent service standards regardless of passenger appearance or status. She reached for a tablet on the coffee table and pulled up a presentation. And yesterday, I conducted the first of what will be regular listening sessions with crew members to uncover additional issues that may have been suppressed. The stories that emerged were both heartbreaking and infuriating, but also filled with hope now that people believe real change is possible. Impressive progress in just 2 weeks, Elise noted with approval. How has the response been mixed, as you might expect? Morgan admitted. Most of the cabin crew have been overwhelmingly positive. Many have shared their own experiences similar to mine. They're relieved that someone finally understands and is addressing the toxic elements they've navigated for years. She paused before continuing. Some of the senior flight crew have been more resistant, particularly those who were closely aligned with Bennett's approach. They see these changes as undermining their authority or catering to political correctness rather than addressing real issues. That's a predictable reaction, Elise observed. People who benefited from the old system often interpret equality as a loss of status rather than a correction of imbalance. Morgan nodded. Exactly. But there's also a growing group in the middle, people who were uncomfortable with aspects of the old culture but felt powerless to change it. They're cautiously optimistic but waiting to see if these changes are sustainable or just a temporary reaction to the incident on the Phoenix. Her face suddenly brightened. But the most encouraging development came yesterday when I visited our flight training center. A group of junior flight attendants in training approached me after my presentation. One young woman said, "For the first time, I feel like I can succeed here without compromising who I am." That single comment made all the challenges worthwhile. Those moments are what sustainable transformation is built on, Elise agreed. Not just changing policies, but changing people's belief in what's possible. The conversation shifted to specific initiatives and strategies, with Elise offering guidance while clearly respecting Morgan's growing ownership of her role. As they discussed next steps, Morgan was struck by how naturally their working relationship had developed, collaborative rather than hierarchical, focused on shared purpose rather than positional authority. As their meeting concluded and Elise prepared to leave, Morgan felt compelled to ask a question that had been on her mind since that pivotal day. When you boarded the Phoenix that morning, did you expect to find what you did, or were you hoping for better? Elise considered the question thoughtfully. I suspected there were issues. The acquisition data pointed to cultural problems beneath the financial metrics. But I always hoped to be proven wrong about such things. It would have been far simpler if the flight had simply demonstrated excellent service consistently delivered to all passengers. And the decision to promote me, was that spontaneous or part of your plan? Neither exactly. Elise smiled, touching her father's watch. A gesture Morgan had noticed was habitual when she was thinking deeply. I came aboard looking for truth, not specific outcomes. What I found was both problems and potential solutions. You were clearly part of the solution, someone with the right values and instincts who had been constrained by the wrong system. She continued. My father always said that great leaders don't create excellence from nothing. They recognize it where it already exists and remove the barriers that prevent it from flourishing. Your promotion wasn't planned, but it was a natural response to recognizing the leadership qualities you demonstrated under difficult circumstances. Morgan absorbed this with thoughtful appreciation. Well, I'm grateful not just for the opportunity, but for seeing something in me that others missed. As Elise departed, Morgan returned to the window, watching an aircraft begin its takeoff roll, gathering speed before lifting gracefully into the sky. The metaphor wasn't lost on her SkyElite too, was gaining momentum in its transformation, preparing to soar in a new direction. Her own journey from constrained flight attendant to empowered leader reflected this evolution. For years, she had been forced to navigate conflicting demands between service excellence and selective discrimination between personal integrity and professional survival. Now she was helping to create a new reality where such conflicts need not exist, where premium truly meant excellence for all, not preference for some. A knock at her door announced the arrival of her next appointment, a meeting with Carlos Mendez from maintenance and several other staff members who had volunteered to join a cross-departmental working group on service standards. People who had previously been separated by hierarchical barriers were now collaborating to rebuild the company's approach from the ground up. "Come in," she called, feeling a surge of purpose as she welcomed them. "I'm so glad you're all here. We have important work to do." The Phoenix was rising, and she was helping to chart its new course, a path defined by consistency, integrity, and genuine respect for everyone who chose to fly with SkyElite, regardless of who they appeared to be. 1 month after the pivotal flight on the Phoenix SkyElite's Manhattan headquarters buzzed with anticipation. The company's grand atrium, typically a serene space of marble and glass, had been transformed into an event venue for what the invitation had described simply as a New Horizons SkyElite's future vision. Nearly 300 people filled the space, employees from every level and department, key clients, industry partners, and selected media representatives. The diversity of the gathering itself represented a departure from past company events, which had typically been restricted to senior leadership and high-profile clients. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Isabella Martinez stepped to the podium, her professional demeanor tinged with genuine enthusiasm. "Good morning and welcome," she began. "Today marks not just a new chapter for SkyElite Aviation, but a fundamental reimagining of what luxury private aviation can and should be." The large screen behind her, illuminated with SkyElite's refreshed logo, still recognizable but subtly updated to reflect the company's evolution. For those who haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting her, I'm honored to introduce the visionary behind our transformation, Elise Townsend, founder and CEO of Meridian Global Investments, and the new owner of SkyElite Aviation. Elise approached the podium with characteristic, understated elegance, her navy blue suit simple but impeccably tailored, her only jewelry the vintage watch that had become something of a signature. The audience's applause was polite if somewhat uncertain. Many were still forming their impressions of the new ownership. "Thank you, Isabella, and thank you all for being part of this important day," Elise began. "When Meridian acquired SkyElite a month ago, we saw a company with extraordinary potential, premium aircraft, global reach, technical excellence, but also significant challenges that transcended balance sheets and operational metrics." She paused, her gaze moving deliberately across the assembled crowd. Those challenges centered on a fundamental question. What does premium truly mean in private aviation? Is it selective preference for certain clients over others? Is it reinforcing status hierarchies through uneven service? Or is it something more meaningful? A commitment to consistent excellence for everyone who chooses to fly with us, regardless of who they appear to be. The directness of the question created a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a collective recognition that this would not be a typical corporate announcement filled with vague platitudes and financial projections. To answer that question honestly, I needed to experience SkyElite as our clients, do not as a visiting executive receiving rehearsed presentations, but as a passenger navigating the actual service experience. So I became one traveling on multiple flights across different routes over the past month, observing how our systems and culture functioned in real time. Murmurs rippled through the audience as understanding dawned. The rumors that had circulated throughout the company of the new owner conducting undercover assessments were being confirmed directly. What I discovered was a company of tremendous potential, handicapped by a deeply problematic culture, one where service quality depended on subjective assessments of client importance, where appearance often determined treatment, where legitimate concerns were actively buried to preserve a narrative of excellence that didn't match reality. The candor was startling in a corporate context, but Elise continued with calm confidence. Rather than hide these findings or address them through vague initiatives, we've chosen to confront them directly and transform them comprehensively. Today, I'm proud to announce the Phoenix Protocol SkyElite's complete cultural and operational reset. The screen behind her shifted to display the initiative's 3 core principles: consistent excellence, equal respect, and transparent accountability. Under the Phoenix Protocol, SkyElite is fundamentally redefining premium service. No longer will it mean preferential treatment based on appearance, background, or relationship history. Instead, it will mean consistent excellence delivered equally to every client who chooses to fly with us. Elise gestured to the side of the stage, inviting Morgan Rivera to join her. To lead this transformation, we've appointed Morgan Rivera as our new Director of Client Experience. Morgan brings not only exceptional professional skills, but first-hand knowledge of the challenges we're addressing. Her journey from flight attendant to director in just 1 month may seem unconventional by traditional standards, but it perfectly embodies our commitment to elevating those who demonstrate the values that will define SkyElite's future. Morgan stepped forward with composed confidence that reflected her rapid growth into her leadership role. Thank you, Ms. Townsend. The Phoenix Protocol represents more than a policy change. It's a complete reimagining of how we define and deliver premium service. She advanced to the next slide, which outlined specific changes being implemented across the organization. We've already begun comprehensive retraining for all client-facing staff, established new accountability systems that ensure consistent service standards regardless of who's being served, and created transparent reporting mechanisms that prevent legitimate concerns from being buried or dismissed. As Morgan continued her presentation, the audience's initial uncertainty gradually gave way to engaged attention. The clarity of the vision and the concrete steps being outlined created a sense of momentum that even skeptics found difficult to dismiss. Halfway through, a moment of unscripted authenticity captured the essence of the transformation better than any prepared remarks could have. A young maintenance technician, later identified as Sophia Reyes in her first year with the company, raised her hand during the Q&A session. I've been afraid to speak up about safety concerns because I've seen what happens to people who do, she said, her voice trembling slightly but determined. Will these changes really protect people like me who just want to do our jobs properly? Before Elise or Morgan could respond, Carlos Mendez stood up from his seat in the middle of the audience. 3 weeks ago, I shared documentation I'd been collecting for years about maintenance protocols being compromised for VIP clients, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the atrium. I was terrified of losing my job. Instead, I was appointed to lead a new technical integrity team. So, yes, these changes are real. For the first time in my 12 years here, doing the right thing is being rewarded instead of punished. The spontaneous testimony created a ripple effect, with several other employees standing to share brief accounts of how the initial phase of transformation had already impacted their work experience. What had been planned as a formal corporate announcement had evolved into something more authentic, a community beginning to believe in the possibility of meaningful change. As the formal program concluded, the atmosphere in the atrium was electric, with a mixture of hope, skepticism, and curiosity. Various conversations broke out among different groups, reflecting the complex emotions that accompany any significant transformation. Victoria and Gregory Palmer, who had accepted the invitation with what Isabella had described as cautious curiosity, approached Elise during the reception. Their experience aboard the Phoenix had clearly prompted reflection, particularly for Gregory, who had become notably more engaged and less deferential to his wife's stronger personality. Ms. Townsend, Gregory began, what you're implementing here goes beyond SkyElite. It challenges assumptions that have defined private aviation for decades. That's precisely the point, Elise replied. Sometimes an entire industry needs to reconsider its foundational assumptions. Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I've been thinking about what you said on the Phoenix about how loyalty should earn appreciation, but not preferential treatment that comes at others' expense. It's not how I was raised to think about service. Few of us were, Elise acknowledged. We've all been conditioned to equate premium service with exclusive access and special treatment. The Phoenix Protocol proposes something different, that true premium means consistent excellence for everyone, not selective preference for some. Victoria nodded slowly. We flew back to New York with your new protocols in place. The service was actually better, more genuine somehow, less about performance and more about authentic care. That's exactly what we're aiming for. Morgan interjected, having joined the conversation. When staff don't have to navigate artificial hierarchies or enforce subjective preferences, they can focus entirely on delivering exceptional service to everyone. As the Palmers moved on, James Harrington approached with an industry publication in hand. You've created quite a stir, he observed, showing Elise the headline, SkyElite Revolution, New Owner Challenges Industry's Elite Service Model. That was never the goal, Elise replied, but I'm not surprised by the reaction. When you question assumptions that have gone unchallenged for decades, it tends to create ripples. More like tidal waves, Harrington corrected with a smile. 3 other private aviation companies have already announced service consistency reviews in the past week. No one wants to be seen as behind the curve on this. As the event concluded and attendees gradually dispersed, Morgan approached Elise with a thoughtful expression. What are you thinking? Elise asked, noting her contemplative mood. I'm thinking about how we measure success going forward, Morgan replied. Not just in client satisfaction metrics or operational efficiency, but in human terms. How do we know if we're truly creating the culture we envision? Elise considered this thoughtfully. I think we'll know we've succeeded when excellence is no longer noteworthy, when consistently respectful, high-quality service becomes so normal that no one remarks on it. When our clients come to expect dignity and respect as the baseline rather than a special accommodation. When our staff no longer have to choose between doing their jobs well and doing them ethically. Morgan nodded, absorbing this vision. That's a high standard. Premium should be, Elise replied simply. As they walked together through the now quiet atrium, Elise reflected on the journey thus far. The Phoenix Protocol's public unveiling marked a significant milestone, but as both women knew, the real work of transformation was ongoing, a continuous process of examination, adjustment, and recommitment to the principles that would define SkyElite's future. The company was evolving not just in policies and practices, but in its fundamental identity, from an organization where premium meant preferential to one, where it meant consistent excellence for all. The journey would continue to present challenges, resistance, and unexpected revelations. But the direction was clear and the commitment unwavering. As they reached the exit, they paused before a newly installed sculpture in the atrium, a sleek, modern phoenix rising from stylized flames commissioned to symbolize the company's rebirth. The plaque beneath it read, simply, "Excellence is not selective. It is consistent." The phoenix was truly rising from the ashes of its former self. 6 months after the pivotal flight that catalyzed SkyElite's transformation, Elise Townsend settled into Seat 1A aboard the Phoenix for a journey from New York to San Francisco. The aircraft retained its elegant design and premium amenities, but the atmosphere within it had undergone a profound change, one that reflected the broader evolution of the company itself. As she observed the pre-flight preparations, Elise noted the confident professionalism of the crew, attentive without being obsequious, respectful without being deferential, consistent in their interactions with each passenger regardless of appearance or demeanor. These weren't merely behavioral changes, but manifestations of a deeper cultural shift that had taken root throughout the organization. "Ms. Townsend." "Welcome aboard," said the flight attendant, a young man named David, whose nameplate also displayed small flag pins representing the 5 languages he spoke. "Would you prefer still or sparkling water before takeoff?" This simple question, offered to every passenger with the same warmth and attention, embodied the new SkyElite approach: personalized service delivered with consistent excellence regardless of who was being served. Captain Lucia Ramirez emerged briefly from the cockpit, greeting each passenger with the same warm professionalism. Promoted from the secondary routes she'd been relegated to under the old system, Ramirez had quickly established herself as one of SkyElite's most skilled and respected pilots. Her leadership style, technically excellent, but also emotionally intelligent, embodied the balanced approach that now characterized SkyElite's culture. "Good morning, Ms. Townsend," she said with a genuine smile. "Weather conditions are favorable all the way to San Francisco. We should have a smooth flight with an on-time arrival." "Thank you, Captain Ramirez," Elise replied. "How has the new scheduling system been working for the flight crews?" Transformative Ramirez answered honestly. "Having transparent rotations based on objective criteria rather than subjective favor has improved morale dramatically. People feel they're being evaluated on their performance rather than their connections." Through the cabin window, Elise noticed a maintenance crew completing final checks on a nearby aircraft. Carlos Mendez was visible in his new role as technical integrity team leader, clipboard in hand, as he supervised the work. When he happened to glance toward the Phoenix, he spotted Elise and offered a respectful nod, an acknowledgement between colleagues rather than a gesture of deference from subordinate to superior. As the remaining passengers boarded, Elise noticed a new arrival being welcomed, an elegantly dressed older woman who moved with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. The flight attendant guided her to her seat with the same attentive courtesy extended to all passengers. "Dr. Williams, welcome aboard. Your seat is right here 2B. May I offer you something to drink before takeoff?" The name registered immediately with Elise. Dr. Josephine Williams was a pioneering neurosurgeon whose groundbreaking research had transformed treatment protocols for traumatic brain injuries. She was also, Elise knew, someone who had experienced discrimination on previous SkyElite flights, one of the passengers whose complaints had been systematically buried under the old regime. After the attendant had moved on, Elise introduced herself. "Dr. Williams, I'm Elise Townsend. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." "Ms. Townsend." Dr. Williams acknowledged with a warm smile. "I've been following SkyElite's transformation with great interest. After my last experience, I had vowed never to fly with your company again, but colleagues convinced me to give the new SkyElite a chance." "I appreciate your willingness to reconsider," Elise replied sincerely. "If you don't mind my asking, what has your experience been so far?" Dr. Williams considered the question thoughtfully. "Refreshingly different. From reservation to boarding, I've been treated with consistent respect, not because of my credentials or achievements, but simply as a passenger who's paid for premium service. That's how it should always have been, of course, but we both know it wasn't." "No, it wasn't," Elise agreed candidly. "We're working to ensure that consistent excellence becomes our defining standard rather than an occasional experience dependent on who's being served." "A worthy goal." Dr. Williams nodded. "And from what I've observed today, you're making real progress." The Phoenix completed its boarding process, and the safety briefing began delivered with the same professional attention, regardless of which passenger was being addressed. As they taxied toward the runway, Elise reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The Phoenix protocol had been fully implemented across all operations, establishing clear standards and accountability mechanisms that ensured consistent service regardless of passenger characteristics. The anonymous reporting system had revealed additional issues that had been hidden under the old culture, allowing them to be addressed openly and structurally. Morgan Rivera had continued to thrive in her role as Director of Client Experience, developing innovative training programs and accountability systems that reinforced the new service standards. Her personal journey from constrained flight attendant to empowered leader had become something of an internal legend, a tangible example of how the transformation created opportunities for those whose potential had been suppressed by the old system. Isabella Martinez had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, her long-standing commitment to operational excellence finally matched with the authority to implement it consistently. Under her leadership, the company had eliminated the hidden hierarchies that had prioritized certain clients' aircraft and routes over others, establishing transparent standards that applied equally regardless of who was flying. Even the Palmers had evolved in their own way, while Victoria occasionally struggled to adapt to the new reality where her preferences no longer automatically superseded others. Gregory had embraced the changes with surprising enthusiasm. He had even joined a client advisory panel that provided feedback on SkyElite's service evolution, offering valuable perspective on the transition from a long-term client's viewpoint. Most significantly, a comprehensive safety review had identified and addressed numerous instances where protocols had been compromised to accommodate client preferences or schedules. The resulting improvements had not only enhanced operational safety, but had earned SkyElite industry recognition for its proactive approach to compliance and transparency. The Phoenix began its takeoff roll, powerful engines accelerating the aircraft down the runway before lifting gracefully into the clear morning sky. Through her window, Elise watched the New York skyline recede, the city's familiar towers growing smaller as they climbed. A young woman seated across the aisle caught Elise's eye and smiled. Sophia Reyes, the maintenance technician who had bravely spoken up at the transformation unveiling. She was traveling to San Francisco for advanced certification training, part of SkyElite's new technical development program that identified and elevated talented staff regardless of seniority or background. Ms. Townsend, Sophia acknowledged. "It's nice to see you flying with us." "I try to experience our service regularly," Elise explained. "It keeps me connected to what our clients experience." Sophia nodded. "That makes sense. I've been telling everyone in maintenance about how you flew incognito to test the service. It's become kind of legendary." Elise smiled. "The goal isn't to create legends, but to build a culture where such tests would reveal only what we want to be true, consistent excellence for everyone." "We're getting there," Sophia replied confidently. "For the first time since I joined SkyElite, I feel proud to tell people where I work." As the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dimmed, Elise returned to reviewing quarterly results on her tablet. The financial metrics confirmed what she had already observed in operational terms. The transformation wasn't just ethically right, it was good business. Client retention had initially dipped, as some who preferred the old hierarchical system took their business elsewhere, but this had been more than offset by increased loyalty from those who appreciated the new approach, plus an influx of new clients attracted by SkyElite's reputation for consistent excellence. Staff turnover had decreased dramatically, reducing training costs and improving service quality. Safety metrics showed a measurable improvement with corresponding reductions in insurance premiums and compliance costs. The most telling statistic, however, was buried in the client satisfaction data. Complaints about inconsistent service had dropped by 87%, while positive comments about genuine respect and authentic care had increased by over 200%. The new SkyElite wasn't just performing differently, it was being experienced differently by those it served. As the Phoenix continued westward, the symbolism wasn't lost on Elise. The aircraft that had been the setting for the pivotal confrontation was now soaring smoothly, its journey mirroring the company's own transformation from a culture of selective preference to one of consistent excellence. The work wasn't complete, transformation rarely is, but the foundation had been laid for a new kind of premium aviation experience, one defined not by who was served, but by how they were served. The Phoenix had truly risen from the ashes, reborn with a clearer purpose and stronger principles. In seat 1A, exactly where the journey of transformation had begun, Elise Townsend looked toward the horizon with quiet satisfaction. She reached down to touch her father's watch, the timepiece that had witnessed her journey from powerless passenger to transformative leader. Time reveals truth, he had always said. And the truth revealed aboard the Phoenix 6 months ago had catalyzed change that extended far beyond a single flight or company. The Phoenix was flying true, its course set toward a future defined by respect, consistency, and genuine excellence, not just for some, but for everyone on board. What happened in seat 1A that day wasn't just about one woman refusing to move, one captain overstepping his authority, or one company facing its own uncomfortable truth. It was about something far more fundamental, the moment when power collides with principle, when assumption meets reality, and when a single act of quiet dignity changes everything. The Phoenix continues to soar, but it flies a different course. Now one guided by the understanding that true premium service isn't measured by who receives special treatment, but by consistent excellence delivered to all. One where respect isn't earned through appearance or status, but extended as the baseline everyone deserves. Has someone ever underestimated you based on how you look? Have you witnessed that perfect moment when prejudice meets its unexpected match? Have you been in a situation where standing your ground changed more than just your immediate circumstances? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters. The most powerful aspect of Elise Townsend's stand wasn't that Captain Bennett lost his position, or that Victoria Palmer was humbled. It was that an entire company, and potentially an industry, emerged stronger, more principled, and ultimately more successful by embracing a culture where excellence is defined by consistency rather than selectivity. This isn't just about private aviation or luxury services. It's about the fundamental choice we all face whether to perpetuate systems that serve our immediate interests or build ones that elevate everyone through genuine respect and consistent excellence. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because transformation doesn't happen only in corporate boardrooms or luxury aircraft. It happens in daily interactions, in moment-by-moment choices about how we treat others, especially when we think no one important is watching. Remember, what Elise discovered, true status isn't determined by your seat assignment or your outward appearance. It's revealed in how you treat people when you have the power not to. And true leadership isn't about maintaining comfortable hierarchies. It's about having the courage to dismantle them when they no longer serve a greater purpose. Time reveals truth. And sometimes that truth arrives in unexpected moments when someone quietly refuses to accept less than what they deserve. When they stand firm not just for themselves, but for everyone who has ever been told directly or implicitly that they don't belong. If you found value in this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of justice, dignity, and transformation. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder that one person standing firmly on principle can create ripples of change that transform entire industries. And let us know in the comments, what seat are you standing your ground in today?